It is a very interesting geopolitical situation prevailing now in the world. I think this is my common parlance. I'm not an external affairs expert or a foreign affairs expert, but to a common man, I would like to think it's a very interesting position now, present geopolitical situation. So number one is the 36% of the world population lives in countries that have actually condemned the Russian and support of the sanctions on the Russian economy, such as US, those are in the European Union, as well as UK, Japan, Australia, and Canada, number one. And number two, whereas nearly 1/3 of the world's other population lives in a country that remains neutral so far, led by India, Brazil, Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, South Africa, and UAE. This is the second part. And the third portion is 32% of the world's population live in country that supports Russia's action. So this is why India's diplomatic stand is of paramount significance that has to be taken in a careful, cautious manner. So the countries in the East, starting from the top to bottom, if you examine Russia, China, India, Pakistan, Bangladesh, Sri Lanka, they have abstained from the voting in the UN Security Council as well as the UN General Assembly. Sir, so I would like to pose a specific question or a specific clarification to the Honorable Foreign Minister Sri Jaishankar ji, because as an academic, for the academic sake, I would like to know from the Honorable Minister whether this pattern is resulting in the formulation of a neo-geopolitical consensus in the West and the East, whether such a culmination or the formulation is taking place in the world beyond all the political differences, strategic political differences, such a formulation is coming into existence. I would like to seek the clarification from the Honorable Minister, and also would like to know the political stand in this respect as far as India is concerned. Sir, coming to the India and Russia relations, sir, India has a long-standing relationship with Russia, with both strategic and political. Sir, 60 to 70% of India's military hardware is of Russia origin. Not only that, India-Russia military technical cooperation has evolved from a buyer-seller framework to one involving in joint research, development, and production of advanced technologies and systems. This is extremely crucial, sir. This is extremely crucial at a time when India has an ongoing border standoff with China. Sir, in the early years, USSR as well as Russia has used their veto power in UN Security Council 6 times. Sir, in the year 1957, over the Kashmir issue, when the then leader of Soviet Union, Khrushchev, has said Moscow was just across the border, and in case of any trouble in Kashmir, Delhi should just give a shout to the USSR. That was in the year 1957. Sir, in 1961, as per the report of Khrushchev, they sent a telegram to the former Prime Minister Pandit Jawaharlal Nehru ji, in which he said that India's action to do away with the outpost of colonialism in its territory is absolutely lawful and justified. And sir, in 1962, where Russia vetoed the Irish resolution in the UN Security Council, urging India and Pakistan to directly negotiate in the Kashmir issue. Sir, in the year 1971, it is very interesting, the USSR has thrice had exercised that veto power in favor of India. And that too, to ensure that the issue remains a bilateral one, instead of becoming a global concern and attracting the interference of the third-party nations. And two, that the UN could not pass a resolution in favor of ceasefire between India and Pakistan. This is the stand taken by USSR since 1957 until this time. So, sir, my point is, thus Russia has proven itself to be a trustworthy strategic partner of India and time-tested ally. This is my observation in respect of our relation with Russia. Sir, coming to the economic impact of the crisis. Sir, on a macroeconomic study, it can be seen that the economic repercussions in this crisis is manifold, which one of them is direct repercussion that stems from this is of the elevated oil prices. So Russia is the world's third largest producer and exporter of oil after US and Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, meeting 10% of the global demand. So in the early days of the crisis, the price, I'm not going to the details, sir. Sir, this crisis will also overthrow out of kilter the macroeconomic assumptions on which projections in budget 2022-2023 and the economic surveys are based. So definitely the economic economic impact has to be taken very seriously. Sir, currently we are seeing an increase of $30 rise in the crude oil. So the rise in the crude oil price poses inflation, fiscal and external sector risk. Sir, if the war is to continue and the sanction to sustain may lead to a major global economic crisis, and that too after the COVID-19 pandemic, where the economies are still suffering from. Sir, in such a situation, what is the step to be taken by our government at this juncture? Sir, my suggestion is, and my point is, history has proven that war has never been, nor shall it ever be, a resolution for anything. Coming from the land of Gandhiji and Subhash Chandra Bose, we have always been able to find a balance between himsa and ahimsa. So I propose that we should take this as our diplomatic stand, and India should take the initiative in mediation to resolve the dispute to restore the peace. Sir, within 2 minutes I will finish. Sir, the recent meeting held between the Honorable Prime Minister of India and the Foreign Minister of Russia, Sergei Lavrov, where Sergei Lavrov has underlined that India has an independent foreign policy, not under the influence of US, indicated that if India was to play the role of a mediator in the case of Ukraine, then it can support such a process and no one will be against it. Sir, the same was expressed from the Ukrainian counterpart even at the early stages of the crisis. Sir, to me, it seems a good opportunity for India to play a substantial role in the ongoing stalemate. I am reminded of the good old golden days of NAM, non-alignment movement, and the leadership role played by India during the crisis in the former days. Sir, we have been all along professing the principle of Vasudhaiva Kudumbakam in our practice and belief. India should therefore impress upon all countries proactively that the world cannot afford this man-made catastrophe at a time when it is still to recover from the trials and tribulations of the COVID-19 pandemic. So, sir, it is time when all nations are taking sides that India should take the initiative to resolve the conflict as an honest mediator. Sir, I am sure that India enjoys that stature and goodwill with all concerns. With these words, I conclude. Thank you very much, sir.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, sir, for allowing me to speak on this Rule 193 discussion with regard to the situation in Ukraine. A horrendous tragedy is unfolding in Ukraine since the 24th of February 2022. 40 days later, 4 million people have been displaced. Over 4,000 civilian casualties have taken place. Indeterminate number of armed personnel, both Ukrainian and Russians, have been killed in the conflict. The alleged killings in Bucha, a suburb of Kyiv, has once again brought home the horrendous reality that war is only exciting as long as you watch it on a television channel. The long peace of Europe has once again been shattered after the Balkan conflict of the 1990s and the 2001. This conflict in Ukraine, unlike the previous ones in Europe, will redefine the global world order just as World War I did, World War II did, the Cold War did, the end of the Cold War did, the War on Terror did in all its negative manifestations. A new Iron Curtain seems to be descending across the world. And unlike what Winston Churchill had said at Fulton Falls in Missouri, and with your permission, Mr. Speaker, sir, I will quote that from Stettin in the Baltic to Trieste in the Adriatic, an Iron Curtain has descended across the continent. Behind that line lie all the capitals of the ancient states of Central and Eastern Europe: Warsaw, Berlin, Prague, Vienna, Budapest, Belgrade, Bucharest and Sofia. All these famous cities and populations around them lie in what I must call the Soviet sphere, and all are subject in one form or another, not only to Soviet influence, but to a very high and in many cases, increasing measure of control from Moscow. But unlike the Iron Curtain, which had divided Europe between 1945 and 1989, this new Iron Curtain has the potential of actually dividing the world once again. And behind it, this Iron Curtain, Mr. Speaker, sir, may lie the great civilizations of Russia, China, and Iran, and their myriad allies, Myanmar, Pakistan, Syria, North Korea, to name a few. And the recent joint statement on the 4th of February 2022 between China and Russia expounding international relations entering a new era and global sustainable development may actually become the foundation of this unfortunate division which the world is witnessing today. We may be once again witnesses to a new history being created in the world. Unfortunately, Mr. Speaker, sir, in this new great game, Ukraine is today what Belgium was to the British-French enmity in the early 19th century. Poland was to the German-Russian rivalry for over 2 centuries. What Afghanistan was to the battle to bring down communism, a battleground, and unfortunately, at best, a chess piece. Mr. Speaker, sir, who is responsible for the situation in Ukraine? Undoubtedly, the first coercive step was taken by Russia. But then, Russia has been a trusted friend of India, and it has been a long-standing ally. Russia has come to India's aid in probably our most difficult times. This House may recall in its earlier avatars that on the 10th of December 1971, the then President of the United States of America, Mr. Richard Nixon, and his Secretary of State, Mr. Henry Kissinger, had ordered the 74th Task Force of the US 7th Fleet, led by the USS Carrier Enterprise, into the Bay of Bengal. And this was to stave off the liberation of Bangladesh. India had invoked the Treaty of Peace and Friendship with the erstwhile Soviet Union, and the 10th Operative Battle Group Pacific Fleet under the command of Admiral Vladimir Krushlagov, if I pronounce the name correctly, had slipped anchor in Vladivostok, and they had made Godspeed for the Bay of Bengal. And they were successful in checkmating the joint American and British task force which had come into the Bay of Bengal, and that scripted India's finest hour, and also late Prime Minister Indira Gandhi's finest hour, when we liberated Bangladesh and made it an independent country. That's a history for which, or that's an act for which we owe a debt of gratitude, a debt of honor to the erstwhile Soviet Union and its successor state, Russia. But then, Mr. Speaker, sir, friends also have to be told, if they are wrong, that they possibly need to get their act together. And 40 days into this war, and Mr. External Affairs Minister was smiling, what I meant to say was that Russia may have been told privately, or would have to be told privately, because after 40 days of this conflict, Russian war aims appear to be ill-defined or at best muddled. Does Russia want to split Ukraine at the Dnieper River? Does it want a regime change? What does it mean by denazification of Ukraine? Does it want to create a land corridor between the Donbas region and Crimea? Or is it testing the Anglo-American part? For Ukraine joining NATO is at best a cat's paw. It's been on and off the table since the Bucharest summit in 2008. And America, exhausted after 2 decades of trying to reorder the frozen geography and power balance of the Middle East post the dismemberment of the Ottoman Empire, should have anticipated this after their ignominious withdrawal from Afghanistan. But does Russia alone bear responsibility for this conflict? Mr. Chairperson, sir, in my humble estimation, the Anglo-American alliance bears equal responsibility. On the 26th of December 1991, Mr. Chairperson, sir, when the erstwhile Soviet Union ceased to exist, or it was dissolved, Ukraine was the third largest nuclear nation in the world. It had the third largest nuclear arsenal in the world. In 1994, in terms of the Budapest Memorandum, which was midwifed by the United States and Great Britain, Ukraine was stripped of its nuclear arsenal in return for amorphous security guarantees that if its peace or sovereignty was ever transgressed upon or trifled with. But unfortunately, when the push came to the shove, these political commitments evaporated into thin air. We have a saying in Punjabi, Mr. Chairperson, sir, and it goes as such, ki Rab nede ke kusun, is God closer or the punch? And unfortunately, Ukraine traded amorphous security guarantees for what was a substantive, tangible security guarantee it had in terms of its nuclear weapons and its nuclear arsenals. This is a cruel thing to say, Mr. Chairperson, sir, but unfortunately, in the times that we live in, I think it needs to be said. Ukraine also, unfortunately, it seems miscalculated. They should have been far more sensitive to Russian concerns and the eastward expansion of NATO, which Russia time and again characterized as a security threat to its own sovereignty and integrity as a nation. In three waves, first with United Germany retaining its membership of NATO, then in 1999 with the Czech Republic, Hungary and Poland joining NATO, in 2004 Bulgaria, Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, Romania, Slovakia, Slovenia, 2009 Albania and Croatia, 2017 Montenegro, 2020 Macedonia. 14 countries have joined NATO since the breakup of the erstwhile Soviet Union, and they all lie in Eastern Europe. And therefore, going all the way back to the Munich Security Summit of 2007, when President Vladimir Putin had articulated Russia's concerns with regard to this eastward expansion of NATO, possibly Ukraine could have been a little more circumspect and a little more careful. I wouldn't say that Ukraine should have gone down the path that Finland went down in 1948, what is called the Finlandization of European foreign policy. But I hasten to add that Ukraine possibly needed to be far, far more careful and cognizant of the security concerns of its eastern neighbor. Under these circumstances, when the world seems to be in a flux, and even around India there seems to be turmoil, there is political unrest in Pakistan, there is economic unrest in Sri Lanka, what is it that India should really be doing? And there I would like to commend the government. I would like to commend the foreign minister. The government so far has been very cautious and circumspect. The government has been trying to tread a very thin line. It's been trying to walk on the narrow edge of the wedge, and it's not a very easy act to perform. But I'm afraid that this may just be the beginning. The push may not have come as yet, because if you go by some of the statements which the United States Deputy National Security Advisor, who has an Indian-sounding name, Mr. Dalip Singh, articulated while he was in Delhi, or the exchange which the foreign minister had with his British counterpart, I think the pressure is just, is just getting built up. And therefore, my concern is that Nehruvian autonomy, what we call non-alignment, that held India in good stead between 1946, going back to the first Asian Relations Conference, all the way up till 1989, when the Berlin Wall collapsed, that luxury may not be available to India. We may not really have the option of being able to sit atop this new Iron Curtain. And the reason why I say this is not because I'm making a value judgment on the current government. Unfortunately, the geopolitical situation as it has evolved, post the collapse of the Soviet Union and Eastern Europe, has also made India take positions going back 3 decades. The economic alignment in 1991 with the Washington Consensus, the 2003 next steps in strategic partnership, the 2008 Indo-US civil nuclear engagement, and then 2014 onwards, the various defense agreements with the United States, namely the Logistics Exchange Agreement, LEMA in 2016, the Communications and Interoperability Security Arrangement in 2018, the Basic Exchange and Cooperation Agreement in 2020, the re-energized Quad that we have become a part of now, I think to a very large extent has taken us far closer to the West than we would have been comfortable with in this current situation that not only we but the world finds itself. So therefore, under those circumstances, I would like to, I'll just take 2 more minutes, Mr. Chairperson, sir. I would like to recommend to the government that the strategic autonomy, the Nehruvian principles of non-alignment that's held India in good stead between 1946 and 1989 or 1991 are principles that are worth going back to. I know our friends on that side of the House, they leave no stone unturned, and with every breath they try and criticize the first Prime Minister of India, Mr. Jawaharlal Nehru. But the fact remains that those principles which were enunciated then possibly have stood the test of time, and Ukraine and the crisis in Ukraine and the position which the government of India has taken possibly bears the most eloquent testimony to those principles which were articulated at the founding of our republic. I would just end by saying a few words about the evacuation. I would once again like to commend the government for extricating Indian students from an extremely difficult, precarious situation. The External Affairs Minister had at length explained in the other house, and I was watching it on television, as to how the operation was complex and fraught with difficulties. But may I hasten to add that India has had a long history of evacuations. We've done 23 major evacuation operations going all the way back to 1962, 63. And may I mention some of them? 63, 64, Burma, Southeast Asia, where we took out between 300,000 to 500,000 people. August to October 1990, Kuwait, where we took out 170,000 to 200,000 Indians. 2006, July, Lebanon, where we evacuated about 12,000 people under Operation Sakoon. Libya, February, March 2011, and I can go on and on, chapter and verse. But I regret to say, Mr. Chairperson, and I'm ending my intervention, I have never seen the kind of chest thumping, the kind of self-congratulatory ecstasy, if I may say, which was at display during the recent evacuations. Making young students, children, chant slogans in favor of the government in aeroplanes by ministers of the government of India, I think was a self-defeating spectacle. I would like to commend the government that whatever efforts you had made, commendable efforts, unfortunately got undone by that spectacle which was completely unnecessary. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairperson, sir.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Manish ji. Next, Sri Brijendra Singh ji.
Thank you, Chairperson, sir, for allowing me to speak under Rule 193 on the discussion on the situation in Ukraine. I am also thankful to my party for affording me this opportunity to speak in the House on 2 consecutive days. It's a first for me. Sir, before I begin, let me put in a caveat that I am neither an expert on international relations nor am I versed in the vocabulary of diplomacy. So what I say may be taken as musings of a concerned and partly informed citizen. So the current conflict in Ukraine is perhaps the most important geopolitical event since the pulling down of the Berlin Wall in November 1989, which marked the end of the Cold War. Why I say this is because this war in Ukraine has exposed the limitations of the world order as we've known for more than 7 decades. But does it indicate a move towards a new world order? Does it mark a dispersal of power among the big nation states? Does it mark the first signs of an emerging multipolar world? These and so many other questions are thrown up by this conflict. Because this conflict, as was rightly said, is a European conflict, but its ramifications can already be seen across the world. But when one thinks of the Russia-Ukraine conflict, and more specifically Ukraine, because that's where the theater of war is. So what we hear constantly is Ukraine. What are the thoughts that instantly capture our mind? Or at least they have my mind. One, the students and the young people who were stuck there, mostly or almost all of them students of medicine who were there. And the numbers were more than 20,000. Second, it's the first full-scale war since the US invasion of Iraq, and it is being telecast live 24/7. Unfortunately, the Russian television has been blanked out in India, so we don't get to see it from their side. So what we get is the Western perspective, which is kind of fed to us on 24/7 basis. Third, India's independent foreign policy. There are questions being raised whether it is possible or justifiable to stay neutral, or as the word was used, consistent in such times. But that is what it has been. It's been an independent foreign policy. Fourthly, does this war also indicate that realpolitik does dictate and shape geopolitics, that each to his own? And lastly, the impact on economy. Everyone is concerned as to what will happen to the world economy, and not just economy of a region or a few countries, but the ramifications it will have across the world. Now, I'll try and build on these few points or these thoughts that I have summarized above. And let me begin with the issue of students and their evacuation. It's a very common phrase, all is well that ends well. Sir, you yourself raised concerns about why we were slow in the beginning, why were we not more proactive. All these things sound good in retrospect. But we are not talking about a normal situation. We are talking about a country which is engulfed in war. It is not as if the government did not issue advisories. And it is not that these advisories were issued as a matter of routine. These are exceptional advisories, which were issued in the month of January. Registration was opened up. More than 20,000 Indians registered with the Indian embassy in Kiev. But unfortunately, the situation was so fluid that no one knew for sure that war is actually going to happen. I remember I was in my constituency interacting with people, and two parents came to me. Their children were there in Kharkiv, and they said, MP साहब जरा बताइए कि आप हमारे बच्चों को वापस लाने के लिए क्या करेंगे? And it had so happened that that very day or the previous evening, the news going around on televisions was that the Russian forces are withdrawing. So that was the kind of confusion which prevailed, and resultantly, in spite of the advisory, only about 4,000 people had decided to come back to India before the war actually broke out on 24th of February 2022. So in retrospect, yes, one could argue this, but as I said, it was not a normal situation. It was not something which was known beforehand, but in spite of all that, the efforts which were put in, the efforts which were put in by the Prime Minister of our country, the efforts which were put in by the Ministry of External Affairs, in coordinating with not just Ukraine and Russia, but the neighboring countries of Ukraine, which included Poland, which included Hungary, it included Slovakia, Moldova, Romania, because these were the exit points. In the sense, people had to move from Ukraine to these countries to get out of there. And it was a Herculean task. Our consulates had to be strengthened. Almost, as was stated in the External Affairs Minister's Suomoto statement, some staff of additional 57 people, embassy staff had to be deployed there to assist in this evacuation. So all efforts were made. And let us not forget, especially the eastern side of Ukraine, where a serious war was raging at the time, where you have these places which we've been hearing of since day one, which is Kharkiv and then subsequently Sumy. This is where the actual fighting was happening. So to expect that people could be just moved in and they would help evacuate, it doesn't happen that way. And it is here that the role of the Prime Minister comes into the picture, because he's the one who interacted with the presidents of both Ukraine and Russia. And I'm not saying because of that there was a cessation in warfare, but at least a window was provided so that a corridor could be created and students could be moved out of that place. 3 lakh people, 3 million people were at the borders at that time. 3 million people, 30 lakh approximately, who were kind of all homeless and on their way to move out of Ukraine into the neighboring countries. So to expect a very easy way out is to expect the moon. But in spite of all that, 22,500 people have been evacuated, most of them students, without a single casualty. Nothing could be greater in terms of success than that. But I have to say there are children, so it was our bounden duty to get them home. And we have got them home. So let us not kind of put question marks on that. But yes, I do have a request. And sir, as you yourself mentioned, that these students, their futures hang in balance now. The chances of their going back to Ukraine and completing their education perhaps will not happen. So some via media will have to be worked out by government of India, either in consultation with Ukraine or with other countries, or within our own medical system, as to ensure that these students do complete their education in some form or the other, so that that purpose is at least taken care of. Sir, I have to take this opportunity to thank once again, all those who were mentioned in the External Affairs Minister's Suomoto statement. And this House owes a debt of gratitude towards all those who were involved in Operation Ganga. And these include our Prime Minister, our External Affairs Minister, and the Ministry of External Affairs, the Ministry of Defense, Ministry of Civil Aviation, NDRF, Air Force, private airlines. In fact, private airlines, out of the 90 flights which came out of the war zone or the neighboring countries, out of 90, 76 were private airlines and 14 were Indian Air Force. The embassy personnel who worked under the most adverse circumstances. Then our union ministers who acted as special envoys at the behest of our Prime Minister, Shri Jyotiraditya Scindia ji, Shri Hardeep Puri ji, Shri Kiran Rijiju ji, and General V.K. Singh, who were deployed at Romania, Hungary, Slovakia, and Poland. And they facilitated and oversaw the evacuation process in these places. And I, for one, did not expect from my esteemed colleague to pick on certain snippets from social media which had gone viral and make it some kind of an issue on the floor of the House. But that's their nature. One can't help with that. So, and also, we owe a debt of gratitude to the countries who have cooperated with us in this regard, which includes both Russia and Ukraine. I mean, whatever people might say about our stand on the war which is going on, Ukraine has been very forthcoming in providing all the assistance in helping us evacuate our people from Ukraine. And also, Poland, Moldova, Hungary, Romania. So all these countries we are thankful to. So secondly, the point which I raised, that it is perhaps the first full-scale war since the invasion of Iraq. And again, like the Iraq war, this is not a war between equals. But my esteemed colleague Manish Tiwari ji did bring out what could have led to this, and one can have a view on that. I would just mention two things here. In fact, two scholars. One is actually a journalist called Tim Marshall. Tim Marshall wrote a book some time back called The Prisoners of Geography. And he says that there are certain geographical issues which you can't escape. Howsoever new or old a country might be, there are certain facts of geography you cannot escape. And according to him, Poland and Ukraine are the two red lines which Russia will never allow anyone to cross. Russia today is a country with only 1.6 billion GDP. But these things go beyond just the economic strength. They are existential in nature to a country, to a nation state. And in this case, Ukraine more than anything else, Russia will fight to the last man was known to everyone. They conquered or captured Crimea in 2014. That was part of this only. 2015, University of Chicago, John Mearsheimer. It's a 45-minute lecture. He brings it out quite clearly that the way NATO is going about doing things and the way it's expanding its boundaries more and more towards the doorsteps of Russia, and the way they are trying to incorporate Ukraine into the NATO system, there are going to be consequences. And consequences, he was very specific in saying, are going to be totally to the disadvantage of Ukraine. It is Ukraine which is going to be destroyed. Neither the NATO countries will suffer for it, nor anyone else. If you look back today and hear it, it sounds almost prophetic, because whatever is said seems to be playing out as if to a copybook. But that's how it's happened. So it's a full-scale war that we are witness to. And as they say that you can start the war, but how it will end, no one can predict. And same thing seems to be happening here also. It's more than 40 days, and a resolution still does not seem to be in sight. Now we come to something which is very, very relevant to us, which we all think strongly about and have our views on it, which is our foreign policy. The External Affairs Minister in his statement used the word steadfast and consistent. I would just refer to these 5 statements of our permanent mission at the UN. All these statements are consistent about one thing: immediate de-escalation of tension, diplomacy and dialogue, and sincere and sustained diplomatic efforts to ensure that concerns of all sides are resolved through constructive dialogue. This is the thread which runs through all these statements. So we have been steadfast about it, we have been consistent, but I'm also reminded, I think it was G.B. Shaw, when someone asked him that, why aren't you ever consistent in what you say or what you believe in? He's supposed to have said, consistency is a characteristic of the asses and I'm not an ass. So India is consistent in its stand today, but what is there in store for us in future? Our foreign policy is that way. It's in very good hands, it's in very strong hands, and I'm sure as times unfold, that will be taken care of. Sir, now, when we talk about international relations and India's international policy, there is a whole gamut, and I can't go into the details of it. I'll just pick on 2-3 points. India-Russia relations. Relations which are termed a friendship, India-Russia friendship. Our friend mentioned about as to why India isn't taking a principled stand and so on and so forth. I just have to mention the Hungarian invasion in 1956. the Prague Spring of 1978, the Afghan invasion of 1979, India's stand then also was what it is today. So let us not fool ourselves into believing that there was something else happening earlier and something which is kind of unethical which is happening today. Lastly, sir, there's this great thing about Quad that, maybe India's standing is now affected because, our stand might be taken otherwise. Japan has been here. We've had a summit. A $40 billion agreement of investment has been agreed to over the next 5 years. There's been a summit meeting with Australia also, and there has been no bad blood. There has been nothing of concern in these meetings, which just goes to show that Quad is in place. The United States of America, the most powerful player in the picture, has accepted, maybe kind of conditionally, but they accept our stance and our compulsions, and so we are well placed in that situation. There is the issue of sanctions. The Katsa is being hung over us as some kind of a sword, but still we've gone ahead and made the purchase of S-400 systems. So it is not as if it is just us who are getting affected. Everyone is getting affected. Everyone is recalibrating its standing and recalibrating its friendships across the world and relations across the world. Lastly, sir, last point, sir. Impact on the economy is going to be on us. It is going to be worldwide. We've experienced this in 1973, the first oil shock, 1979, the second oil shock. So definitely there are going to be consequences. Sir, External Affairs Minister in one of his interviews had said, India tilts on its own side. May I conclude by saying we are too big to be tilting on anyone else's shoulder. Our weight is too much to bear. We have to carry our own weight, and we shall do so with aplomb and ease of an ancient civilization and a formidable nation. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Next speaker, Dr. T. Sumadiji.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairperson, sir, for allowing me to partake in this discussion on Ukraine. Sir, the war will end, the leaders will shake hands, the old woman will keep waiting for her martyred son, that girl will wait for her beloved husband, and those children will wait for their hero father. I don't know who sold their homeland, but I saw who paid the price. Absolutely. So these powerful lines of the famous Palestinian poet Mahmoud Darwish keep on haunting us as we watch those disturbing images from Ukraine, civilians being bombarded, innocent civilians carpet bombed and got killed in the warfare between two countries, and museums and theatres getting shelled, and our own Indian citizens, particularly students, fleeing to borders on foot, by foot. And more recently, the ghastly scenes of 410 dead bodies of the civilians unearthed, and those who were ruthlessly killed by the troops, which was a family of a woman mayor of Timotijin, who were buried in the pine yard. We are all heartbroken, sir. And war is one word which needed to be abolished from the dictionary itself. And it is high time, as one of the largest democracies of the world, India, with its positive image, should take the moral responsibility to be the honest mediator between Ukraine, the world's largest food producer, and Russia, the greatest exporter of gas to Europe. Sir, the West may criticize us, sitting on the fence and as a mute spectator, shaky, but we do understand that India has to adopt a diplomatic tightrope walk with its time-tested relationship with Russia. For all along, we have nurtured a pro-Russian sentiment, and we do understand that. And that on one side, and our membership in the US-led Quad alliance on the other side. And also its fear about the China, Russia, Pakistan axis, a discomfort closer home, but still the whole world looks up to us that we have to adorn the role of a real negotiator, in the honest negotiator in the real sense of the term. Sir, before proceeding further, I would like to pay homage to a dear Indian student who has lost his life in the war, and I share the grief with the family members. And also, as a concerned citizen and member of the Parliament, I would like to congratulate the efforts taken by our Union Minister for the External Affairs Minister in not alone for his humanitarian assistance, but also in the speedy steps he has taken in the transportation of our Indian citizens, especially our students, back home safely. Sir, our minister in a statement in Rajya Sabha had issued a statement, and he has told in that 90 tons of humanitarian assistance has been given, and he is planning to give more, especially medicines. I thank him also for having honoured the request of our dear Chief Minister, who had taken proactive steps in this. Sir, the UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres has said our world is facing a moment of peril, and as a responsible Chief Minister, our Chief Minister of Tamil Nadu, Thalapathy M.K. Stalin, has viewed the situation. More than 5,000 Tamilian students got stranded in Ukraine. So viewing the situation within his limited capacities. Sir, foreign policy is the union domain. So within his limited capacities, he wrote a letter to you requesting the immediate evacuation. Not only that, he had also constituted a committee comprising MPs, MLAs, IAS officers, and appointed a nodal officer also to coordinate between their relatives and help those students with the financial aid also in the border countries, along with the tying up of the diaspora. And apart from this, the state government had also opened the 24/7 help desks in the Podihai Illam in New Delhi. So it is the responsibility of the Indian government as well also to take proactive steps. While we appreciate the Operation Ganga, as Mr. Manish Tiwari had pointed out, much of self-boosting propaganda had been done online with that, but we appreciate the efforts, but there are a few lacunas in it. Sir, I would like to point out to the Union Minister through you that the operation done was not an evacuation, it is a transportation. Sir, lastly, our students were told they had to reach somehow to the border, either by walking on foot or by commuting through local trains or buses. No assistance was given to them except advices, and that is the lacuna I would like to point out to the Honourable Minister, sir. Also, our Prime Minister, while taking stock of the situation, emphasized Make in India in medical education, and to quote him, he said, I quote, "Can't our state governments make good policies for land allotment in this regard?" Unquote. Sir, it's not the question of just allotting lands. It is the question of allowing opportunities for the students from marginal and weakening sections to enter into medical colleges, and that is why Tamil Nadu strictly resists the NEET in back home. Sir, in the last 5 years, an average of 16 lakh students appear for the NEET exam, but only 120 make it to the 562 medical colleges in India. It is not just those who score 200 out of 300 in NEET choose to go to foreign universities, but those who score 90th percentile in NEET are also opting to go out. Also, like other competitive exams in India, the cutoff for NEET rises dramatically. That is why we vehemently oppose this. Sir, the Indian medical students who have been now transported to India are facing an abyss now. There's no future for them. It looks very volatile because the NMC regulation says medical graduates from a foreign university will have to complete their education from a single institution. Now, that's a problem that they have to face. Government need to take redressal measures for that. And also, the union government should take remedial steps regarding the foreign medical graduate examination, FMGE. It can be advanced and final year students can be appointed on duty. Sir, while this is a local scenario, sir, 2 more minutes. Local scenario, I'm the only speaker, please, sir. This is the local scenario. The issue is much more larger. Sir, the Asian Aid says the Russian forces finding increasing Ukrainian resistance are following their Syrian playbook of attacking hospitals, schools and civilians, including women and children in a war of attrition. Sir, while we understand that our External Affairs Minister has repeatedly reiterated that India respects the international order and the sovereign territory as well as the integrity of the borders, we have to also take up the moral responsibility of who's the oppressor and who's on the other side of the war. So though it's a tight corner because of a dependence on Russia's oil and gas, also the long-tested relationship as had been pointed out by honorable members here, we can't just be sitting on this fence as a mute spectator, just having the moment of Hamlet, Shakespeare's Hamlet, to be or not to be. That's the situation. So our BJP as well as our government always profess about Vasudhaiva Kudumbakam. If the whole world is a family, when Ukraine is part of one of the world's family, is it not a moral responsibility to go and give a helping hand to Ukraine? Yeah. Also, our Prime Minister has many times reiterated that India is Vishwa Guru, the world's teacher. And I would like to quote Professor Pullappari Balakrishnan's statement here. He says, a teacher is granted respect for speaking truth to power. India marks her chosen self-image by refusing to speak the truth. So, sir, they say everything is fair in the game of war and love, but you cannot justify war in any sense of fairness in it. Sir, I would like to share few points to highlight why it is an unfair war, sir. The first point is, the Russian president has so long, he has been ironically justifying this aggression, saying that he is going to denazify Ukraine. Sir, it is a fiasco. Ukraine has embraced the Nazi Germany in 1940s, carried out by the Russian then, and our Ukraine President Zelensky's father was also a victim of that cruelty. And Ukraine is a UN member state, and a declared war on it by a permanent member of the Security Council is itself a violation in the UN Charter. The International Court of Justice has condemned it. The very important point, sir, I would like to inform you, through you to the Union Minister, the Indian judge on the International Court of Justice, I debar from referring his name, he has also voted against Russia. And India has also breached the BRICS resolution, which it had passed unanimously in its New Delhi declaration, as quoted in the Hindu 21st March. Sir, Ukraine, as pointed out by the honourable member Mr. Tiwari, gave up the nuclear arsenal after signing the Budapest Memorandum on the basis of the security given by the veto-holding permanent members. Now it is also a breach on that. Sir, as pointed out by Professor Vinay Kaura, I quote, those in India echoing Russian resentment against the eastward expansion of NATO are reminded by a Western analyst that a NATO-Russian Council has been formed specially to alleviate Russian concerns, and that Russia was recognized as one of the world's leading industrial powers through a formal admission into its elite G7, not on the basis of industrial might, but to soften its bruised superego, unquote.
Yes, Sumati, no,
last point, sir. I would sum up with the following observation of G.N. Devi, I quote, today, India stands in a splendid international isolation because it has not only come a long way from Nehru's non-alignment policy, but also forgotten that Nehru's non-alignment in external affairs was organically linked to his idea of a non-partisan secularism in home affairs. And therefore, rarely did either of them sound hollow in his case, unquote. Sir, also India has not officially discarded the Panchashil principles, not yet, though it has moved from its non-aligned posture during the Cold War to its multi-alignment in the 21st century of that.
Yes.
Sir, I also just like to conclude again by Devi by quoting a passage by the writers in an open letter which was released by the PEN International. They say, I quote, there can be no free and safe Europe without a free and independent Ukraine. Peace must prevail. Thank you very much, sir.
Very good.
Shri Sudeep Bandyopadhyay ji.
Honorable Chairman, sir, this subject is to share with the views of the government of India. And we as a party, Trinamool Congress, normally in a mood or intent to extend support to the Ministry of External Affairs and the government's decision when it is related with matter of external affairs. we gauge the situation, we study about the situation, but we are concerned now at this stage also about those students who have come back from Ukraine, especially medical students, and what would be their future. Jaishankarji, last week I met Prime Minister and we had a long talk for more than 20 minutes. I was carrying a letter of Mamata Banerjee, my Chief Minister. There she put some proposals that how these medical students can be replaced. She wanted to absorb them in her own state with some ideas. But while talking, Prime Minister intimated me straightway that I have decided, Government of India has decided to send these students back to Hungary, mainly at Budapest. I said, Prime Minister, that why not you are taking or asking Russian Federation to take them back and to provide them with the seats in the medical institutions. She said it to me, though it is a 1:1 conversation, but on record, I better keep it in front of you by which you can make some assessment also. That I will not talk to Russia regarding the students in Hungary, though the education cost is little more expensive. But still, my government is taking some decision, and I hope that this problem will be sorted out easily. So I want to know that where the situation actually stands now and what would be the fate of these students. Sir, this Russia-Ukraine war is a continuation since 2014. And Minsk, the capital of Belarus, I had the scope to visit a delegation with Rajiv Rudi and Savant, with Sumitra Mahajan. The team visited Belarus and Ukraine. And this picture floats in front of my eyes. I had my opportunity to visit Eastern Europe when all were within the command of the Soviet Union. At my very early young age, I was with Youth Congress. That time I had been to Czechoslovakia, Hungary, Poland, Romania, East Berlin. So these all sectors, ultimately they were broken up. That Gorbachev issue, Glasnost issue, those are all old issues which I don't want to discuss today. But what I want to mention here, that these two agreements were held at Belarus, capital Minsk, with with Russian Federation and with Ukraine. One was signed and broken in 2014. What was there? It included prisoners exchange, deliveries of humanitarian aid without of heavy weapons. But the agreement quickly broke down in 2014. Again, another agreement was signed in possibly 2015. France and Germany mediated. But now I couldn't find, from the very beginning, no big country, nothing, no force had taken any initiative to initiate a peace talk in between the two countries. I am not saying about our own country, but any country. NATO's member was Ukraine. NATO is full of the European countries, including USA and Canada also. But none of these countries took any initiative. But we watched the disastrous deaths and the attack of Russia on Ukraine. It was a disastrous issue. Matter. The way the war was there was extremely disastrous in nature, painful, most shocking, and no doubt it was heartbreaking. Sir, if I read a small statement that how many civilians died in Ukraine. Nearly 3,000 civilians have been killed or injured. The report is up to 28th March 2022. This few days I have not that much of well-drafted information. And more than 10 million displaced since Russia invaded Ukraine. And 99 children were killed and 126 were injured. The cost of direct damage to Ukraine's infrastructure amid Russia's ongoing invasion has reached almost an estimated 63 billion, according to an analysis by the Kyiv School of Economics. It is their own assessment of the Ukraine group. That is also of 28 March 2022. The latest analysis shows that as of March 24, at least 4,431 residential buildings, 92 factories and warehouses, 378 institutions of secondary and higher education, 138 healthcare institutions, 12 airports, 7 thermal power plants and hydroelectric power plants have been damaged. So all totaling up to $63 crore billion. Compared to the previous estimate published on March 17, net growth announced to $3.5 billion according to the KSE Institute. Sir, what I want to mention that we became concerned when the war started. We expected that it will be stopped, but it was not. And naturally, the huge numbers of Indians were alive there with huge tensions. India's responsibility was aimed at evacuating Indian citizens from Ukraine. That was a good step, I appreciate. We marked the statement read by the India's permanent representative at UN Security Council was actually a non-committal statement. That was neither here nor there type statement. This escalation of tension along the border of Ukraine with the Russian Federation is a matter of deep concern. These developments have the potential to undermine peace and security of the region. India's permanent representative to the UN, T.S. Trimurti, said at the UNSC meeting. So, sir, war should be completed. And if on our part any peaceful step is possible to take up, we should try to initiate. Because India-Soviet Union is all out from the very beginning. Since our early ages, we have seen Indo-Soviet Treaty. We are concerned in many issues, at different issues, whether it is in United Nations General Council meeting, UNGA, or whether to apply veto, Russia all along supported us in many issues. So we can initiate dialogue and give a leadership in front of the whole world that India is fully concerned with the battle, with the war. This war has pained us. The way the people have lost their lives, it is disastrous and painful, inhuman. So whether India is in a position to make it a complete peace talk initiated, that I want to know.
Thank you.
Our next speaker is there also, Shaukat Rai, he will speak.
Thank
So, sir, I repeat our stand that any stand taken by Government of India so far external affairs is concerned, we stand by the government wholeheartedly.
Thank you very much. Now the Honorable Minister Sri Hardeep Singh Puri ji would like to intervene. Please, Minister.
Sir, thank you very much. Sir, I had the privilege of being nominated as one of the 4 special envoys that the Honorable Prime Minister deputed to the countries around Ukraine following the launch of military operations on 24th February, when it became necessary to escalate the evacuation of Indian students who were studying in the Ukraine. Sir, anyone who has even a nodding acquaintance with issues relating to foreign and security policy, and anyone who watches global hotspots will know that the determination that is required to be made when situations of tension are escalating and there's an exacerbation of tension, timing is of the essence. So let me start, sir, by providing a perspective based on facts personally, with which I am personally familiar, what the Honourable Member Shri N.K. Premchandran said, who was the lead speaker today. He made some excellent points, both he, and now I'm addressing the chair. So I address the chair and through the chair, Honourable Premchandran, the speaker. Through the chair. Through the institution of the chair. Sir, there were clear indications, and first of all, advisory and the language which some other countries issued. I believe a reference was made to the US advisory, a reference was made to the Australian and New Zealand advisory. Sir, I am a student of the English language, and when an advisory, sir, in any case, an advisory is by definition an advisory. You advise. You cannot direct, the government cannot direct private citizens who have gone of their own volition to leave a place.
It's not an order.
The advisory was unambiguous, sir. It said all non-essential. By all non-essential means except those whose continued stay there is necessary on account of a number of facts, which means our embassy couldn't have, our colleagues in the embassy would have to stay there. And they stayed right towards the end till they had to be relocated to another place. So I think, sir, the advisory issued on the 15th of February and the subsequent advisories issued, if I remember correctly, on the 20th and the 22nd of February, had the effect of 4,000 of our young friends leaving the Ukraine pursuant to those advisories. Now, let us, and I have some experience, sir, because I was there. Why did the rest not leave? Was it a choice that they exercised? Because they thought military operations would finally not take place? Or was there some consideration, and that is why a reference was made by one of the honourable members to student contractors, to the authorities in universities. Sir, I spoke to many of the 6,177 of my young friends who were evacuated from the Ukrainian border via Hungary. I spoke to them. And many of them had the same story, that they were being encouraged by the authorities of the educational institute which they were attending to say, things are going to be all right, things are going to be all right. Maybe, and I'm in this intervention going to stay totally clear of issues of, foreign and security policy. I want to confine myself to Operation Ganga. When these young students are advised, look, you've got some of you who are in the final year of medical education, you've only got 3 to 5 months left to complete your course, or some of you have got 1 year left. If you choose to leave, we may not be able to organize online classes, and it may result in your losing a year. That is the kind that young minds, that is the kind of talk young minds had to grapple with. And on the 15th, when we issued our first advisory, or on the 20th, till the military operations actually took place, it is a determination they had made. Now, what happens after the 24th February, when that exacerbation of tension results in the commencement of military operations? And here, sir, one of the honourable members referred to, I think it was my friend, my distinguished friend, Shri Manish Tiwari ji, evacuation operations that have been carried out from 1960-61 onwards. Certainly. One of the honourable members who's not here referred to this being a transportation exercise, not an evacuation exercise. I'd like to come back to that in a minute. वहीं से भी चर्चा शुरू कर सकते हैं. Sir, I want to say, based on 39 years experience that I've had in the previous profession, that no matter what the average perception of the lethargy in a bureaucracy is, or a political system, come a crisis and everybody springs into this thing. And this was an operation which the Honourable Prime Minister personally took meetings on, which my friend, the External Affairs Minister, my distinguished colleague, personally took charge on. I was in Guwahati on the 28th doing a Gati Shakti mission event for the Ministry of Petroleum and Natural Gas, when I got a telephone call late in the evening saying, "Ab kal raat ko jaiye, kal jaiye." And then all of us gathered, some of us flew out within hours. I believe that the eye to detail, the meticulous manner in which this was done. Look, I was a student of conflict situations. When some honourable members referred to that one life lost, I am the first to say one life lost is one life too many. But if you're dealing with a situation, now let's look at numbers. So words are used lightly. Displaced personnel or refugees. Number of displaced, I think, are in the vicinity of 10 million, possibly, which includes internally displaced. Number of refugees, perhaps 4 to 5 million. Sir, we were agonizing and we were worried about the welfare of each one of our citizens through Prime Minister's involvement in Delhi, through the External Affairs Minister being in touch with all of them. But look at the overall numbers. I remember one particular evening in Budapest, when I got a call from the External Affairs Minister, said that, this front we thought was well managed because we had 1,200 people on the ground in hotels, in dormitories. Suddenly 1,700 came because there was clogging at the borders of Romania and Poland, and some people were just being pushed down. 1,700 people arrive in one place. We managed. We increased the number of flights from 4 to 7 to 11 in a day. Why and how did that become possible? It is, बहुत आसान होता है राजनीतिक रोटियां सेकने, कोई एक सोशल मीडिया क्लिप करा. I can share with you hundreds of thousands of messages from grateful students and their parents, which was sent, that their evacuation, and I use the word evacuation, was being facilitated. A lot of people were provided buses. That last operation which took place in those cities which are under siege, buses were arranged from neighboring countries. Buses were arranged inside. How is this a transportation arrangement? And the Honorable Prime Minister was working the telephone lines. I know, and I don't need to go into the details. I'm sure this is a part of the geopolitics which the Honorable External Affairs Minister will respond to. He was speaking to the heads of state and government, not only in the Russian Federation, not only in the Ukraine, but all the others. But ladies and gentlemen, let me just tell you, we had barely recovered from COVID, and we are in a warlike situation. And in a warlike situation, the two disputants who are waging war, and I don't want to go into whose fault it is, whether our vote, etc. It's so easy to talk about votes. I've had some experience. The making of foreign and security policy has to be based on tangible national interest, which the government and all the honourable members have said, it is the government which will determine that, rather than easy temptation to episodic social media tweets. Sir, very often in those difficult times, even when you were able to negotiate safe passage from one of the countries involved, only to find that the other party had maybe other military and objectives which they had to look at. So the fact that out of about 22,500, 400 left as a result of the advisories, another 18,500 were successfully evacuated, I think is not a small achievement. And as if you look at the history of evacuation operations I am familiar with, Operation Safe Homecoming, Operation Rahat in 2015, Yemen crisis, Operation Maitri, Nepal earthquake, evacuation from Brussels, Operation Devi Shakti, Operation Ganga, sir. In my humble submission, with 39 years of experience in that field, will rank as one of the most well-coordinated and successful humanitarian evacuation missions undertaken by any country anywhere. I'm not just talking about India. Sir, we faced some very interesting situations. That evening when the Honorable Prime Minister guided us, he said clearly that this is a humanitarian evacuation mission. When you say humanitarian evacuation, you don't stand by technicalities. You do not follow the literal letter of what is written. I remember I was traveling back in a car from the Ukraine border with the person who used to be our ambassador in Budapest. He had been sent back. And I got a telephone call saying that one of the airlines had been fined because they were bringing in Nepali or some other nationals of neighboring countries. We worked the lines. Within minutes it was sorted out. Whole of a government approach. Because we not only brought back, thanks to the clear visionary guidance of the Honorable Prime Minister, nationals of our neighboring country, we also brought back nationals from other developing countries in further continents.
Thank you.
Sir, before I conclude, I also want to say, sir, that this gives me an opportunity, because you said, sir, that the advisories were lacking in clarity and direction. I have tried to place that in perspective, and how I say the advisories were both focused and clear, but also that there was certain uncertainty has been unleashed on account of the disruption in supply lines, which is going to happen depending on the duration and the cost that the military operations take. That disruption could get further widened. But let me tell you what has happened to oil and gas prices meanwhile, sir. Because that is something on which many of us tend to comment without looking at the global picture and what this military operation has done. Sir, at the height of COVID, and I talk about March 2020, gas prices were $19.56 a barrel. They went up in 2021 to $60 to $80. On 24th February, when the military action took place, suddenly they shot up to $92, then up to $124, went up to $130. Sir, are we the only country affected by this? I have with me here, sir, and I can give you the same on gas prices. We have raised the price of petrol by, I think, 9 rupees over 12 or 13 days when the international price has shot up. Now, I have something, sir. Gasoline at the pump, comparison between April 21 and March 22, in USA the increase percentage is 51%, in Canada 52%, in Germany 55%, UK 55%, France 50%, Spain 58%, Sri Lanka 55%, India, sir, 5%.
Yes,
Our percentage increase is 1/10 of what it is elsewhere.
No.
Similarly, I could do for gas, sir. Sir, I thank you very much for the opportunity to be able to participate in this discussion on Rule 193. I think a lot of very valuable issues have been raised. I'm sure my other colleagues, when they participate, and particularly the External Affairs Minister, he will be able to respond to some of the issues on why and with what degree of success we have been able to navigate through this difficult situation, and that navigation will continue with a degree of confidence because the Prime Minister's roadmap that had been laid out is both clearly with a clear direction, and it will be able to avoid the pitfalls which some of the other countries are getting into because of the soundness of our policy. Thank you very much, sir.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Sri Pinaki Mishra.
Mr. Chairperson, I listened with great admiration my very distinguished colleague and friend, Shri Hardeep Puri, make a robust defense of why oil prices in India are going up in a very artful manner, as befits him. He's been a lifelong diplomat of a very, very distinguished career, and therefore he knows how to artfully weave in defense in some other area on an issue quite unrelated today. But I think he's answered some of the critics who've been shouting since the morning about the rise in fuel prices, and I commend him for his artfulness in having dealt with the matter. Mr. Chairperson, all shades of opinion in this House are always one and bipartisan when foreign policy issues are discussed in this House, and today has been no exception. I think even the most trenchant critics of the government are one with the government when dealing with foreign policy issues. There is no question that the non-alignment, which has been the bedrock of our foreign policy for the last 75 years plus, has stood us in good stead, has given us great respect worldwide, has managed to keep us afloat, has managed to keep us deftly clear of many conflict situations wherein otherwise there was a potential for us getting roped in. And I think, therefore, this is a policy that has held us in good stead, and I commend this government for having continued the same policy, even giving credit where it's due sometimes, as we heard the Prime Minister say off and on. The morning television visuals that one sees from Ukraine are heart-rending. There is no doubt about it. I think every heart cries at the kind of massacre that's taking place there. But then all war is about massacres. And therefore, I particularly wish to commend the government for the manner in which it has stood up to the near hectoring by the United States of our position that we've taken, of the nuanced position we've taken, to the point where lowly officials, of course, have virtually openly tried to threaten us. But even the President of the United States has gone to the extent of saying that India's position on the war has been shaky. And I think that's about as strong an indictment as can happen comes from the top quarters of America. But I mean, I find it a bit, frankly, shaky position on their part to give us this model posturing considering their track record. The first country to have employed nuclear weapons on a mass scale. The first country to have carried on a savage war in Korea first, then in Vietnam, thereafter all through the Middle East, in Iraq, in Libya, in Syria, Afghanistan. And those lives that were lost then and the misery that those people went through in those wars and that absolutely calibrated savage bombing, all-night bombings that we used to watch during the first Kuwait War and the second Kuwait War and the second Iraq War, those are still very fresh in our minds. So therefore, it ill behoves the United States to morally hector us on the position India has taken. I think there is, though, even in these blurred lines, something that India will have to strongly consider on at least 2 or 3 issues going forward. Number one, that the entire civilized world, and, which is the Western world as well as our Quad partners in the East, they've all come together on one platform, and therefore there is some degree of isolation that India possibly has to contend with on that score. And that's a matter of, I think, some concern which I have no doubt that the government is fully mindful of going forward. Secondly, clearly now, the Russia-China axis, with Pakistan being a very minor tail there, but the Russia-China axis now is going to be a formidable axis going forward, with Russia very much a junior partner, very much dependent on China virtually for its existence, because with the kind of savage sanctions that have been imposed, and these sanctions are going to go on for a very long time clearly, they now desperately need China to bail them out financially and economically. And so therefore, China's position in our sphere of the world is going to become infinitely stronger, infinitely more powerful, and therefore we have to now contend with that fact very, very carefully. Thirdly, I think we also have to take into consideration the fact that Prime Minister Modi, who has an excellent equation in relations with most of these countries that we deal with, and Mr. Hardeep Puri was absolutely right when he said that the Prime Minister speaking to many of these countries actually entailed some kind of a ceasefire to ensure that Indians were evacuated. And that's quite unprecedented and extraordinary in these times. So therefore, I think there possibly is some also expectation in some quarters that he would go the extra mile in playing peacemaker in these times, that India's position of strength in terms of our track record of ahimsa, our track record of non-alignment, and all the other qualities that our forefathers have bestowed upon us, that we should play with the Prime Minister's muscular diplomatic posturing that has happened over the last 7-8 years, and with good measure. I'm saying this in a positive way, that he should perhaps play a slightly more proactive role. I mean, now that the major part of the evacuation is over, that even for a ceasefire or even for the hostilities to at least come to some kind of cessation, I think perhaps some more vigorous dialing on his part should be in order. There is, I think for India, everybody has spoken about the problem of, give me 5 minutes more? Or
3 minutes.
5 minutes more? Is that good? Yeah. So the problem of almost 22,000 students coming back to India is, of course, a very, very serious and critical issue. Everybody's spoken about it. We need to seriously reflect on how we are going to burnish our own infrastructure in this country to ensure that our children don't have to go abroad for much cheaper education, because we lack for nothing in this country, and therefore for them to have to seek refuge abroad like in this fashion, and then now to come back and be left virtually mid-water is something that we'll need to very seriously consider. And I have no doubt, and this is a very sizable number, because there is 40,000 which have come back from China earlier due to COVID last year, and now this is 22,000 more coming back from here. So therefore, the possibility of them being adjusted in various other countries, again, a more aggressive and a more forward-looking policy has to be undertaken by the government. There is, I think, a silver lining also. Mr. Puri spoke about oil prices going up. Yes, that's been happening. It's been fluctuating. But the bigger problem also is going to be on edible oils, etc., that we are importers of. But of course, our exports should start looking up, because now wheat, which was the major export, wheat and corn, which was the major export of both Russia and Ukraine, accounting for almost 25% of the world's exports, are drying up. And therefore, this is the time for India to really step up a very aggressive export drive to ensure that we gain something from the ashes of this war in terms of our own domestic economy. Mr. Chairman, I expect the government to very proactively, therefore, while all, the government is solidly backed by all shades of both public opinion as well as political opinion in our country. So therefore, they are rock solid on that count. They have held their own so far. But I think going forward, everybody expects, under the leadership of the Prime Minister, for the government to be more proactive, both in the resolution of this conflict, as well as in order to be able to, I think, milk this to our advantage, both financially, economically, and in every other way possible, particularly in the geopolitical context of the fact that the Prime Minister could, and the government could, and the MEA could, and we have a very capable External Affairs Minister who's again had a sterling track record in the ministry. So therefore, under their aegis, if some kind of aggressive policy could be undertaken going forward for a cessation of hostilities, I think that is what all shades of opinion in this House would expect from the government. I thank you very much, Mr. Chairperson. I just want to add one sentence. Mr. Naveen Patnaik has, of course, done his bit. There were many ODIHR students abroad, and I think Mr. Puri will bear us out, because many of them have come back under his aegis, the ODIHR students, and we've thanked, my Chief Minister has personally thanked him for the effort he's made. And therefore, I also would like to say that Mr. Patnaik has done everything he could have to ensure that our ODIHR children have come back from abroad. Thank you very much,
Thank
Mr.
you,
Chairman.
thank you, Sri Pinaki Mishra. Next, Sri Dr. Shashi Tharoor.
Thank you, thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I think this has been a very rich debate already, and I know it's going to continue. And I want to really say that a few years ago, as Chairman of the External Affairs Committee of Parliament, I had said there is no such thing as a Congress foreign policy or a BJP foreign policy. There is only Indian foreign policy and India's national interests. And I will say to you today that I think all the speakers, even those who have been critical of the government and who will be critical about some aspects, have spoken in that spirit of one nation, one set of national interests, and a very strong commitment to what is being done for India and Indians in this challenging situation. And I do want to assure my friend, the Foreign Minister, that we have all been watching with very close attention and admiration the adroit diplomacy he's been conducting, and at the same time with some concern about some of the areas on which we may have a slight difference of emphasis. Let me say, sir, having said that I'd like to address these remarks and the issues facing us under three broad headings, and I'll be fairly brief on each of them. One is the humanitarian situation and the evacuation. The second is our stand at the United Nations. And the third is the geopolitical implications of this crisis for all of us, sir. Now, if we look at the humanitarian situation and the evacuation, I think there is no doubt that we are all incredibly grateful for the success of Operation Ganga and the return of some 23,000 Indians, mainly medical students, back home to India. And on that, I don't believe that there is any particular demurral. But it is to be pointed out that while we commend the embassy for having begun to register the students in Ukraine early in the process, it is also true that some other embassies were quicker off the mark in getting people out. And I think there's no harm in admitting this. This did happen. The fact that we registered the students was useful. But we did not, for example, have enough domestic transport arrangements in Ukraine. A lot of the students had to walk very, very long distances to get to the border points eventually, and that is something we'll have to bear in mind for future situations. So, if we were to look at the positive side of the ledger, the government was very quick to make excellent arrangements in the neighbouring countries, Poland, Hungary, Slovakia, Romania, in order to fly our people out once they had got there. But in getting them to those countries, I'm afraid we were perhaps somewhat found lacking. And I'm not trying to diminish in any way the contributions of our excellent diplomats, our hard-working personnel. The Minister was kind enough to hold a consultative meeting of the External Affairs Ministry, a consultative committee meeting, in which he took us into these young diplomats working 24/7, manning the hotline in order to receive calls from students. All of that was very important. But one set of complaints that many students have expressed, including to me personally, have been the difficulties they encountered in getting to the border points where they had to cross. And I think this is a lesson that we need to bear in mind for the future. And of course, we must all pay tribute to Naveen Shankarappa, whose life was so needlessly and tragically lost when he went out heroically to get food for other Indians who were sheltering in a bunker with him. And that, I think, is indeed something we must absolutely, in this House, unanimously pay tribute for. His parents were gracious enough, as you pointed out, Mr. Chair, when you were speaking, to donate his body to medical research. But there's also, I think, some research we need to do on how these situations got to the stage they did, where we found ourselves with so many people there. I will add that one thing that's a bit unseemly, unfortunately, was the publicity mongering that we conducted in some of the neighboring countries. I got some adverse comments on that. I think it was unnecessary. Our nation would have risen in gratitude, and we don't really need publicity in foreign countries for what we're doing for our own people. That was unfortunate and should have been discouraged. You know what I'm talking about. Well, let's move on, Shaukat. But I do want to mention one more good thing, which I think has not been mentioned by some of the speakers, and that is the timely and appropriate humanitarian aid that India has sent to Ukraine. That was good. I congratulate the government for having taken that initiative. I think we sent something like 90 tons of...
Please. माननीय मंत्री जी, प्लीज. मान्यवर, आलोचना करने के लिए तो गृह होता है. आलोचना का अधिकार जिनका इतना है उतना ही मेरा है. मैं कर सकता हूं, आप जवाब भी दे सकते हैं, मगर बीच में टोका टोकी से नहीं दे सकते. प्लीज, आपकी पार्टी को जो समय मिला है उसमें तथ्यों के साथ बताइएगा. मैं जरूर उसका जवाब. बांटे गए नहीं तो विधेयक
आप सवाल उठाते हैं, वैलिडिटी सवाल उठाऊंगा. माननीय संजय जी का पत्र मिला था, माननीय चेयरमैन के यहां से उनका जवाब भी गया. The Delhi Municipal Corporation Amendment Bill 2022, श्री आपके लेटर का जवाब जा चुका. माननीय प्लीज माननीय सदस्य प्लीज टेक योर सीट्स. मैं क्लियर करना चाहूंगा, माननीय संजय जी का पत्र मिला था, माननीय चेयरमैन के यहां से उनका जवाब भी गया. अभी एक पत्र चेयर को मिला हमारे सदस्य माननीय गोयल जी से. दोनों लोगों ने सवाल उठाया है कि बिल के इंट्रोडक्शन यहां नहीं हो सकता. दरअसल बिल ऑलरेडी इंट्रोड्यूस हो चुका है, यहां कंसिडरेशन और पासिंग के लिए आया है. प्लीज नंबर वन, मैं लेट मी कंप्लीट. नंबर सेकंड, इसके कॉन्स्टिट्यूशनल वैलिडिटी पर वो हाउस तय करेगा. ये एस्टेब्लिश परंपरा है जब से आपकी संसद काम कर रही है. देयर आर इन नंबर ऑफ रूलिंग्स, मैंने खुद इस पर डिटेल में रूलिंग दी है. रूलिंग से भरे पड़े हुए प्रेसिडेंट की हाउस तय करेगा, आप डिस्कशन से तय करेंगे, ये आपको स्वीकार करना है. और उसके लीगल स्क्रूटनी का आप सवाल उठाते हैं तो जुडिशरी तय करेगा, नॉट चेयर कोई अधिकार नहीं. श्री अमित शाह टू मूव, नो परमिशन, नथिंग इज गोइंग ऑन रिकॉर्ड. श्री अमित शाह टू मूव ए मोशन फॉर कंसिडरेशन ऑफ द दिल्ली म्युनिसिपल कॉर्पोरेशन अमेंडमेंट 2022.
उपसभापति महोदय, मैं प्रस्ताव करता हूं कि दिल्ली नगर निगम अधिनियम 1957 का और संशोधन करने के लिए विधेयक पर लोकसभा द्वारा पारित रूप में विचार किया जाए.
माननीय मंत्री जी बोलना चाहेंगे आप?
जी. उपसभापति महोदय, सबसे पहले तो मैं आपको धन्यवाद देना चाहूँगा कि आपने मुझे चर्चा का यहाँ पर बिल पेश करने का मौका दिया है. महोदय, बिल जो मैं लेकर आया हूं, ये राजधानी दिल्ली के तीनों नगर निगमों को एकीकरण के उद्देश्य से लाया गया बिल है। मान्यवर, दिल्ली का कुल क्षेत्र लगभग 1484 वर्ग किलोमीटर है। एनडीएमसी और दिल्ली कैंट को छोड़कर पूरे दिल्ली की सिविक सेवाओं की जिम्मेदारी ये तीन नगर निगमों की है। और एनडीएमसी और कैंट के इलाकों को छोड़ देते हैं तो लगभग 1484 में से 1400 वर्ग किलोमीटर, लगभग 95% क्षेत्र, इसकी जिम्मेदारी दिल्ली नगर निगम के ये तीन बांटे गए निगमों की है। लगभग 1,20,000 कर्मचारी ये सिविक सेवाओं की जिम्मेदारियों का निर्वहन करते हैं। मैं ये इसलिए बताता हूं कि इसी से तीनों नगर निगमों का सुचारू रूप से काम करना कितना महत्वपूर्ण है वो स्पष्ट हो जाता है। राजधानी के अंदर ही राष्ट्रपति भवन, सर्वोच्च अदालत, प्रधानमंत्री कार्यालय, प्रधानमंत्री निवास, ढेर सारे देशों के राजदूतों के निवास, उनके कार्यालय, और जब भी राष्ट्राध्यक्ष किसी भी देश के आते हैं तो राजधानी की उनकी मुलाकात बहुत स्वाभाविक बनती है। उस स्थिति में राजधानी की सिविक सेवाओं का महत्व और बढ़ जाता है। वो सुचारू रूप से चालू रहे, वो नागरिकों के लिए, दिल्ली के नागरिकों के लिए और देश के लिए भी इतना ही महत्वपूर्ण है। मान्यवर, इस संशोधन जो मैं लेकर आया हूं उस पर बाद में सभी सभासदों से इनके विचार सुनने के बाद मैं जवाब दूंगा। उसके पहले मैं इसका एक इतिहास बताना चाहता हूं। मान्यवर, 1883 से पंजाब डिस्ट्रिक्ट बोर्ड एक्ट के तहत ये नगर निगम काम करता था। 1957 में एक कानून के द्वारा दिल्ली का म्युनिसिपल प्रशासन एस्टैब्लिश किया गया। उसके अंदर 93, 1993 में और 2011 में इसको अमेंड किया गया और 2012 में राष्ट्रीय राजधानी क्षेत्र दिल्ली शासन द्वारा दिल्ली नगर निगम संशोधन अधिनियम लाकर दिल्ली नगर निगम को 3 निगम निकायों में बांट दिया गया। उत्तरी दिल्ली नगर निगम, दक्षिणी दिल्ली नगर निगम और पूर्वी दिल्ली नगर निगम। और बांटने के कारण को भी मैंने गृह मंत्रालय में बहुत खंगाला है, मगर किसी भी फाइल पर कोई कारण उपलब्ध नहीं हुआ। एक प्रकार से आनंद फानन में बिल लाया गया, किस उद्देश्य से लाया गया वो तो जो लाए हैं वो ही बता सकते हैं, परंतु रिकॉर्ड पर इसके कोई उद्देश्य उपलब्ध नहीं है। मान्यवर 10 साल हो गए, जो अनुभव आया है ये अलग प्रकार का है। स्वाभाविक रूप से जब ये निगम बांटे गए होंगे, बंटवारा हुआ होगा, उद्देश्य अच्छा ही होगा, सेवाओं के सुधार का होगा, दिल्ली की सिविक सेवाएं और मजबूत हो वो होगा, परंतु परिणाम ऐसा नहीं आया। और परिणाम ऐसा न आने के कारण क्या है, इसमें 4 मुख्य कारण नजर में आए हैं। एक तो तीनों नगर निगमों द्वारा जो नीतियां अपनाई जा रही है वो अलग अलग है। तो एक ही शहर में नीतियों की दृष्टि से एक वाक्यता नहीं है। और वो क्यों नहीं है? क्योंकि तीनों नगर निगमों को जब बांटा गया तब उसके वित्तीय संसाधन और दायित्व का ठीक से आकलन नहीं किया गया। मैं सभी रिकॉर्ड देखकर जिम्मेदारी के साथ इस सदन को बता सकता हूं कि नगर निगम तो वित्तीय रूप से सस्टेन ही नहीं हो सकते। इस प्रकार से उसका बंटवारा किया गया। अब जब वित्तीय रूप से सस्टेन नहीं हो सकते हैं, वो अपना काम नहीं कर सकते हैं, तो उनको टैक्स को रिस्ट्रक्चर करना पड़ेगा, नीतियों में भी बदलाव लाना पड़ेगा, क्योंकि अपने आप को रोज चलाना है। तो एक ही शहर में अलग अलग प्रकार के नीति नियमों से तीनों निगम चलते हैं। कार्मिकों की सेवा की स्थितियों में भी असमानता है। इसके कारण बहुत गहरा असंतोष तीनों निगम के कार्मिकों के बीच में है। और मैं कहना चाहूंगा मान्यवर कि ये अच्छी स्थिति नहीं है। और चौथा कारण भी कहना चाहता हूं, दिल्ली सरकार का सौतेली मां जैसा व्यवहार ये तीनों नगर निगमों को काम करने से अच्छे से
संजय जी, आपको चेयर से अनुमति है, आपकी बात रिकॉर्ड पे नहीं जाएगी। आप क्यों बोल रहे हैं? प्लीज, आपकी बात रिकॉर्ड पे नहीं जा रही है। आप बिना अनुमति के चेयर से ना बोलें, प्लीज।
माननीय अध्यक्ष जी, स्वाभाविक है उनका विरोध, और मैं भी अपेक्षा करता हूं ऐसा ही होगा, करना भी चाहिए उनको। परंतु जब मैं बोलता हूं तो मैं इसके ठोस कारण दूंगा, और मेरा इनसे विनती है कि वो भी जवाब में बताएं कि सौतेली मां जैसा व्यवहार किया है या नहीं किया है। मैं आंकड़ों के साथ इस सदन के पटल पर रखूंगा, क्योंकि राजनीतिक उद्देश्य से अगर राज्य की सरकारें स्थानीय निकायों के साथ सौतेला व्यवहार करेगी तो ना पंचायती राज सफल होगा, ना अर्बन डेवलपमेंट के सारे निकाय सफल होंगे। इसको राजनीतिक दायरे से ऊपर उठकर जिसका जो अधिकार बनता है वो देना पड़ेगा। हम भी कई सारे राज्यों में सत्ता में हैं, कई सारे राज्यों में अलग विचारधारा की, अलग पार्टी की नीचे सत्ता है, कई म्युनिसिपल कॉर्पोरेशन में, कई जिला पंचायत में, कई म्युनिसिपालिटी में। कहीं पर भी हमने ऐसा व्यवहार नहीं देखा है। मान्यवर, मैं 16 साल की आयु से सार्वजनिक जीवन में, ढेर सारे आंकड़े मैंने भी स्टडी किए हैं, मगर मैं जब आंकड़े बताऊंगा, मैं चाहता हूं कि जिसको भी उस पर ऑब्जेक्शन हो मेरे स्टेटमेंट पर, वो सभी ने वास्तविकता सदन के पटल पर रखनी चाहिए। और इसके कारण लगभग 250 से ज्यादा बड़ी हड़तालें हुई है। मान्यवर, 250 से ज्यादा। इसके पहले के 10 साल ले लेते हैं तो 2 बड़ी हड़तालें। क्यों, क्या हो गया? 10 साल के 2 अंतराल में कहां 2 हड़तालें और कहां 250 हड़तालें? क्या हुआ है?
प्लीज प्लीज
मान्यवर, मगर 15 साल से राज्य सरकार हमारी नहीं थी।
प्लीज,
ये 10 साल से ही प्रॉब्लम हुआ है।
आप संजय जी, आपकी बात रिकॉर्ड पे नहीं जा रही है। आप बिना अनुमति के ना बोलें, प्लीज। बीच में इस तरह से आप प्लीज
कर रहे हैं कहने के लिए 15 साल में तो हम थे ही। अगले 5 साल में हड़ताल नहीं पड़ती थी। आप पार्टी की सरकार ने सौतेला व्यवहार करने के कारण ये हड़तालों की संख्या बढ़ी है।
प्लीज प्लीज प्लीज, मैंने संजय, आपकी बात रिकॉर्ड पे नहीं जा रही।
मान्यवर,
बिना चेयर की अनुमति के ना बोले, प्लीज।
वो हल्ले से
प्लीज 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 बैठ
नहीं, आलो
प्लीज 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 प्लीज, कोई बात रिकॉर्ड पे नहीं जा रही आपकी। प्लीज, कोई बात रिकॉर्ड पे नहीं जा रही आपकी। प्लीज प्लीज प्लीज, माननीय मंत्री जी, प्लीज।
मान्यवर, आलोचना करने के लिए तो गृह होता है। आलोचना का अधिकार जिनका इतना है उतना ही मेरा है। मैं कर सकता हूं, आप जवाब भी दे सकते हैं, मगर बीच में टोका टोकी से नहीं ले सकते।
प्लीज,
आपकी पार्टी को जो समय मिला है उसमें तथ्यों के साथ बताइएगा, मैं जरूर उसका जवाब दूंगा, और मैं बाध्य हूं उसका जवाब देने के लिए। मान्यवर, मैं फिर से कहना चाहता हूं कि आप पार्टी की चुनी हुई सरकार के सौतेले मां जैसे व्यवहार के कारण ये निगम ढंग से काम नहीं कर रहे हैं। मान्यवर, तीनों निगमों के बीच में नीतियों के रूप में समानता लाना बहुत जरूरी है। कार्मिकों की सेवा की शर्तों के लिए भी समानता होना बहुत जरूरी है। आर्थिक संसाधन की प्राप्ति और उनके दायित्वों के बीच में भी संतुलन बनाना बहुत जरूरी है और वो तभी हो सकता है जब ये तीनों निगमों को एक कर पूर्ववत स्थिति बहाल की जाए। इसलिए मैं इसको लेकर आया हूं। बहुत सारे सदस्यों ने संशोधन भी रखे, मैंने ध्यान से पढ़े हैं। मैं इसका डिटेल जवाब भी बाद में दूंगा, मगर पहले एक बार मेरा सभी से अपील है कि पार्टी की लाइन से ऊपर उठकर सभी लोग मेरिट्स में चर्चा करें। हमारे खिलाफ भी आप जरूर बोल सकते हैं, आराम से बोलिए, कोई चिंता का विषय नहीं, और मैं हर बात का जवाब भी दूंगा, परंतु बाद में मेरा जवाब भी सुनना चाहिए। धन्यवाद।
Motion moved. There are two amendments by Sri John Britas and Sri Sukhendu Sekhar Roy for reference of Delhi Municipal Corporation Amendment Bill 2022 as passed by Lok Sabha to a select committee of the Rajya Sabha. Members may move their amendments at this stage without any speech. Sri John Britas, are you moving?
Sir, I am moving because it has been brought
Yes,
because
yes.
of political reasons. Yeah.
Mani Sukhendu Sekhar Roy ji, are you moving? Thank you. Not move. The motion for consideration of the bill and the amendments moved thereto are now open for discussion. Abhishek Manu Singhvi ji.
Honorable Chair, sir, distinguished members of this distinguished House, August House, as I rise to oppose this bill, I would like to say at the outset, honorable members, that this bill is, among other things, four things. It is constitutionally suspect, it is legally untenable, it is administratively blunderous, and it is politically hypocritical. And I will make good each of these four heads shortly. But let me say at the outset also, with deep respect to honorable members, that this bill is about control, and more control by a control freak Sarkar. It is nothing to do with the improvement of the plight of the citizens of Delhi or its hapless citizens. This is a dangerous politics of delay through delimitation, going to lead to disorder, disorganization and disaster. And unfortunately, the ruling party, which is moving this bill, wants to rampage amongst the MCDs, in addition to the above 3 Ds, to create also the 3 Cs: control, chaos and corruption. Now friends, let me make my 4 heads good one by one. Why is it constitutionally suspect? Let me concede in favor of the ruling party, the Honorable Home Minister is here, that 239AA of the Constitution, which this bill invokes, gives special powers to Parliament. No doubt about it. Even though you must remember that Delhi is the only entity in India which is constitutionally given a legislature. None other, not Puducherry, not earlier Goa, etc., etc. I will further concede that for 3 subjects, Delhi NCT can make no laws at all, as we know. Land, law and order, etc. They can't touch it. It's beyond their jurisdiction. And I will further concede that in the other areas other than these 3, if Delhi makes a law, then the central government, if it acts on the same field, will override. Subject, of course, to presidential assent, which in view of the central government recommendation will never be given. So, I concede these 3 points in favor of the central government. But now, why is this bill constitutionally suspect, indeed unconstitutional? Why? Because, sir, we forget firstly that we are dealing with municipalities. That is the subject. This subject was created by a special amendment to the Constitution, a 74th amendment, with respect to 1993, pursuant to a high-level committee report called the Dr. L.M. Singhvi Committee Report for decentralization of governance. Secondly, if you pick up this Part 9A, Part 9 is Panchayat, Part 9A is municipalities, you will find that entire provisions, 243, Q, R, S, U, it goes on beyond Z, all of them on the basis of decentralization give power to make laws only to a state government for municipalities. Number 3, even though Parliament has overriding powers, it has overriding powers under which provision, sir? Under 239AA. When did 239AA come? It came in 92. You overrode that by a subsequent constitutional amendment, the 74th Amendment in 1993. Now, where does it leave us? You have a later constitutional amendment, 93, and secondly, you have a special constitutional amendment for municipalities. As a first-year student of law knows that a later and a special law overrides an earlier and a general law. So, sir, I call it constitutionally suspect. It is legislatively incompetent. Of course, it will be challenged. But this approach of this government, कि अभी तो पास कर दो बाद में देखी जाएगी, is hardly behoves a supposedly responsive or responsible government. That's my first point, sir. My second point, the second head is this bill is administratively blunderous. And it assumes that the Janta of India and Delhi eats grass. If improvement of MCD was the object, as the Honorable Home Minister has just said, and I'm sure he will give more facts and figures, then can he tell us how the admitted revenue gap of 2,200 crores just a year ago in these municipalities altogether, that is salary and other pension bill and other expenses of 8,940, their official figures, sir, minus earnings of 6,725 crores, deficit is 2,200 crores. How will it be bridged by this bill? Is there a single provision in this bill, any policy which will improve this? So this is supposed to be a bill for improvement. Secondly, will he tell us how Own Finance Commission of the central government has recommended a devolution of 488 rupees per person per year for every municipality in India. 488 rupiya prati vyakti prati varsh. That comes, sir, for Delhi for the current year or year ago to 4,087 crores. Sir, did you as the central government give 4,087 crores to the municipality of Delhi? If you check up, you gave to a lot of other municipalities. Not the full amount, but you gave, not to Delhi. Then, sir, it is estimated that if you add up what you have not given to the Delhi municipalities for the last 10 odd years, I'm only taking 10, 11 years, the amount is about 12,000 crores. And you are saying improvement? You are first starving somebody and then saying he should be a healthy, bonny child. You are giving him no water and food and you are saying that we are improving them. Sir, thirdly, have you said anything in this bill about why the municipal corporations tax for property tax only 4 lakh properties, whereas in Delhi the minimum count of properties taxable for property tax is 1.2 million. यानी 12 लाख, उसका 1/3, 4 लाख आप tax करते हैं property tax. Have you, honorable movers of the bill, shown us that your own statement is that this bill will improve by garnishing an additional 200 crores. This is your own estimation. And the gap is 2,200 crores in 1 year. So is this an improvement bill? It is not an improvement bill. MCD, sir, we have to accept it. And I say it as a fact, when I started my law practice, we were told that DDA stood for Don't Do Anything Authority. It is much better if you go to their parks now. Sports parks are very good. Sir, if you call it MCD, the most corrupt department, MCD, that would not be a wrong acronym. Sir, if you put on the top of this bill photographs of the mountains of garbage, if you put on this photographs of this bill of the agony of the Aam Aadmi or the middle level person who goes to the office of MCD, then you will realize that this bill is nothing but political hypocrisy. Sir, मेरा तीसरा पहलू कि ये किसी प्रकार से सुधार का बिल नहीं है, ये राजनीतिक आडंबर से ओतप्रोत एक विलंब एवं बाधा डालने वाली चाल चली गई है। ये राजनीतिक भय से प्रेरित है। ये परोक्ष उद्देश्य इसका है जो स्पष्ट रूप से कहा नहीं गया है। नाकामी और भ्रष्टाचार से बीजेपी ने एमसीडी का क्या कर दिया है हाल। नाकामी और भ्रष्टाचार से बीजेपी ने क्या कर दिया है एमसीडी का हाल। यदि एकीकरण करना ही था तो क्यों लगा दिए 7 साल या 10 साल, इसका कोई जवाब नहीं है। जिस दिन प्रदेश के चुनाव आयोग ने घोषणा कर दी कि इस वक्त इस दिन हम घोषणा करने वाले हैं चुनाव की, उसके एक दिन पहले किस विशेष दुष्प्रभाव से आपने उनको एक और घोषणा करवा दी कि हम स्थगित करते हैं सब कुछ। क्या इसलिए क्योंकि मान्यवर क्या इसलिए मान्यवर कि आपने हर संस्था पर सफलता से दुष्प्रभाव करने की पीएचडी करी हुई है। और मैं कहता हूं कि धिक्कार है ऐसी संस्थाओं के और उनके अध्यक्षों के जो इस दुष्प्रभाव पे ध्यान देते हैं या उसके आधार पे एक्ट करते हैं। सर, 272 से 250 करने का औचित्य क्या है जो आपने किया है? इसमें क्या तो हो सकता है? क्या ये जो जादुई बटन है कि 272 से 250 करना एक यात्रा है कुशासन से सुशासन की तरफ, कि 72 को आपने 250 कर दिया? तो इसका उद्देश्य एक ही है। अगर आपने 2 सीट भी कम की होती तो डिलिमिटेशन की आवश्यकता होती, और डिलिमिटेशन का मतलब है विलंब, बाधा। तो क्या यह राजनीतिक आडंबर नहीं है? किस रूप से 272 से 250 बनाने से एक जादुई छड़ी से ये पूरा एमसीडी अगर एकाकीकरण भी हो गया तो भी सुधार हो जाएगी, हमको नहीं बताया जा रहा है। सर, हमारी नहीं सुनते हैं तो कम से कम संविधान की सुन लीजिए, और उच्चतम न्यायालय ने जो अहमदाबाद म्युनिसिपल कॉर्पोरेशन के विषय में कहा था उनकी सुन लीजिए। ये तो विशेष है, गुजरात से है, अहमदाबाद है। जहां तक अनुच्छेद 243U का सवाल है, जरा उसको उठा के पढ़ लें। मैं कोट कर रहा हूं, एवरी म्युनिसिपैलिटी unless sooner dissolved, this is a constitutional provision brought in 93, 74th amendment. Every municipal corporation unless sooner dissolved shall continue for 5 years from the date appointed for its first meeting and no longer. और दूसरा, ये तो डिसोल्यूशन का है, आपका केस डिसोल्यूशन का नहीं है। दूसरा, an election to constitute a municipality shall be completed before the expiry of its duration specified above. ये सीधा लागू है। आपने जिस दिन घोषणा कर रहे थे चुनाव के कार्यक्रम की, उस दिन आपने ये घोषणा करवा दी। और बिफोर द एक्सपायरी ऑफ 6 months फ्रॉम द डेट ऑफ इट्स डिसोल्यूशन। एक्सपायरी है तो आपको उसकी एक्सपायरी, इसकी तारीख शायद मई में है, उसके पहले आपको घोषणा चुनाव करना पड़ता है। नंबर 6, जैसा मैंने कहा संविधान नहीं पढ़ते हैं तो कम से कम उच्चतम न्यायालय को तो पढ़ लीजिए। 2006 में एक निर्णय है किशन सिंह तोमर, जो निर्णय है अहमदाबाद म्युनिसिपल कॉर्पोरेशन के विषय में, और उसमें कहा है कि ये 243U जो मैंने पढ़ा है, ये प्रावधान उच्चतम न्यायालय ने कहा है ये इसलिए बनाया गया है कि विलंब को हटाने के लिए बनाया गया है। संविधान में चुनाव नहीं होते थे एमसीडी में, उनको करवाने के लिए बनाया गया है। और फिर कहा कि एक ही अपवाद होता है इसका, कोई गंभीर और व्यापक प्राकृतिक विपदा, प्राकृतिक विकृति, और फिर उसके आगे का है, मैं नहीं बोल रहा हूं, सुप्रीम कोर्ट बोल रहा है, भूकंप, कोई बहुत बड़ी बाढ़ इत्यादि, और ये भी व्यापक और गंभीर होने चाहिए। एंड द सुप्रीम कोर्ट सेड, कोट अनकोट, इट्स अ कॉन्स्टिट्यूशनल इंपेरेटिव टू हैव इलेक्शंस ऑन टाइम। आप ये कर रहे हैं मान्यवर। आप सब जानते हैं कि आप 243U को संशोधित नहीं कर रहे हैं, न कर सकते हैं आसानी से। आप ये भी जानते हैं कि 7 वर्ष से आपने पुनर्निर्माण करने का, या 10 वर्ष से एमसीडीज में कोई काम नहीं किया। आप ये भी जानते हैं कि आपने एकाकीकरण का नाम भी नहीं लिया इतने सालों से। इसलिए आपने चुनाव के 1 महीने पहले, 1.5 महीने पहले ये जादुई छड़ी घुमा दी। ये क्या राजनीतिक आडंबर नहीं है जो मेरा तीसरा हेड है? मुझे याद आता है बाबा साहब ने अंबेडकर साहब ने जो लिखा था एक बड़ी फेमस किताब ग्रामर ऑफ एनार्की, एंड आई कोट सर, I do feel, however good a constitution may be, it is sure to turn out to be bad, because those who are called to work it happen to be a bad lot, unquote. क्या आप इतिहास के बैड लॉट में जाना चाहते हैं? मैं समझता हूं कि कोई भी जिम्मेवार सरकार नहीं चाहेगी। एमसीडी का एकाकीकरण तो सब सिर्फ बहाना है। दरअसल भाजपा को खुद की एंटी इनकम्बेंसी से बचाना है। इसलिए ये गलत नहीं होगा अगर आप इसको बीएनपी पार्टी कहें, भारतीय जनता पार्टी की जगह भारतीय नियंत्रण पार्टी, कंट्रोल फ्रीक पार्टी। येन केन प्रकारेण किसी तरह से सत्ता में रहना है, संविधान का हनन हो या न हो। सर, माय फोर्थ एंड लास्ट फैसेट, it is legally untenable. Why, sir? We give the highest importance to decentralization. We give, in fact, decentralization is another name for federalism. Sir, 1 second aside, it's very interesting. The word federalism or federal is not used anywhere in our constitution, which is the world's second or third largest constitution. There is a word federal used for federal court, but not federalism as you संघीय ढांचे की बात नहीं है कहीं भी, not a single word. And yet it is interesting that without using federalism or the word federal, the Supreme Court has held federalism to be part of our basic structure. Basic structure means that if you buy a constitutional amendment, take away federalism, you can't do it even then. Now, sir, I am asking this question that Parliament enacts 9 for panchayats, 9A for municipalities in 93 by the 73rd and 74th amendments. It gives a huge impetus for decentralization, local self-governance, pursuant to the LM Singhvi report on this issue. Para after para, 2018 judgment of the Supreme Court, Constitution Bench, 5 judges. I don't have the time to read you the paras. I'll give you the para numbers, those who are interested, 49, 52, 54, 56. They say, I'm quoting, the main purpose of representative government is to represent the public will, perception and the popular sentiment, unquote. Then they say, representative democracy, it is necessary that elected reps develop a sense of belonging with the constituents. Sir, by contrast, have you not driven a coach and 4 through this? Have you not decimated the spirit and the letter of Part 9 and 9A of the Constitution? You are governing Delhi's municipalities, the bottom level. Delhi has no panchayats as such, it's an urban. So the lowest level of governance, you are governing with a hukumnama from Delhi, farman from a distant emperor, with no regard to ground realities of decentralized governance. You are excluding the government, whosoever the government may be of Delhi, from participatory governance. And then, sir, why I said legally untenable, there is a very nice clause here in this bill you have got, sir. 2B, 2 bracket B. It says government everywhere shall mean central government. मैंने कहा था control freak, याद है आपको? Control freak सरकार. Central government, and you know this clause which you have put says it applies to 19 provisions I counted. It says this government used in 19 provisions shall mean central government. 3A, 5, 55, 56, 193, कौन से प्रावधान हैं? These are those provisions, sir, which provide for creation and division of wards, creation and division of zones, complete control over the commissioner, his own salaries, loans, general superintendence regarding building plans. These are words of government there. आपने कहा सब जगह उसको central government पढ़िए. This is decentralization. This is part 9 and 9A of the 74th, 73rd constitutional amendment. This is devolution of powers. And sir, before you abuse the late lamented Sheila Dikshit, remember, there was an India which was born and thought and acted before the BJP came to power. There was an India which born and thought and acted. This trifurcation, most people have not noticed this. The Balakrishnan committee recommended trifurcation in 1987, sir. जो आप जिसको knee jerk reaction समझते हैं किसी सरकार का, in 1980, I'm sorry, not 1987, 1989, the Balakrishnan committee. Then a Virendra Prakash committee recommended in its report of February 2001 splitting into 4 corporations. Then in 2011, a group of ministers of the central government recommended splitting into 5. That may be right or wrong, but it was not a knee-jerk reaction. And it has stood the test of time. Sir, my time is limited. Let me wind up by saying, with all these background, the statement of objects of this bill uses almost Alice in Wonderland language. It's long on rhetoric and short on substance. I have given you the amount of money you have deprived and starved the MCDs of. I have given you the fact that all municipalities require central government funds. And yet, what your SOR, your statement of objects says, after roughly 10 years of your governance in the MCDs or 8 years, you are the people there. You are able to say with a straight face in the SOR of this bill, which you are asked to pass, I quote, there was a huge gap in resources available to 3 corporations. And then you say, this gap has widened, increasing the financial difficulties of the MCD. ये तो बड़ी एलिस इन वंडरलैंड बात है कि केंद्र सरकार भी आपकी है, MCD में भी आप हैं. फाइनेंस कमीशन कहता है कि 488 रुपीस पर पर्सन पर ईयर देना है. सर, जस्ट 1 मिनट मोर. देयरफॉर आई वुड से विद रिस्पेक्ट कि ये बात गलत नहीं है कि हम आहें भी भरते हैं तो हो जाते हैं बदनाम. आप कत्ल भी करते हो तो चर्चा नहीं होता. सर, व्हेन यू टॉक ऑफ 272 to 250 delimitation, election postponement, do you talk of the corruption in the MCD under your watch? Do you talk of the mountains of garbage? Do you talk of the annual 2,200 crore deficit? Do you talk of the non-remittance of the central government funds? You don't talk of any of this. Where is the improvement going to be? By just making a jadui chhadi of 272 to 250 or saying trifurcation into unification. Therefore, I can only quote the words immortalized by the late lamented Sushma Swaraj. And I end with that, sir. तू इधर उधर की बात न कर, ये बता दे काफिला क्यों लुटा. तू इधर उधर की बात न कर, ये बता दे काफिला क्यों लुटा. हमें रहजनों से गिला नहीं, तेरी रहबारी का सवाल है. थैंक यू.
थैंक यू. डॉक्टर सुधांशु त्रिवेदी जी. डॉक्टर सुधांशु त्रिवेदी जी.
माननीय उपसभापति महोदय, आज मैं यहाँ माननीय गृह मंत्री द्वारा प्रस्तुत MCD एकीकरण बिल के ऊपर समर्थन में खड़ा हुआ हूं. देखिए, हम एकीकरण के पक्ष में हैं, वो विभाजन के पक्ष में हैं. तो हम सदैव अखंडता के पक्ष में रहते हैं, वो खंडता के पक्ष में रहते हैं. ये तो हमारे उनके बीच की सोच का एक सतत अंतर है. अभी हमारे विद्वान मित्र
आपस में बात न कर, प्लीज.
Dr. Singhvi ji, who is a very learned legal luminary and in a very intellectually loaded initial speech, he has used certain words: suspect, incompetence, control freak, chaos, political blunder. मुझे ऐसा लगा कि शायद ये शब्दों का समायोजन उन्होंने जो भी किया हो, ये मूल रूप से कहीं उनकी पार्टी के भाव से आ रहे थे. मुझे लगा कि अगर यह समायोजन किया जाए, that an incompetent suspect in an penchant for uncontrolled, up to have a full control, committed a political blunder and plunged the party into chaos. तो मुझे लगता है ज्यादा बेहतर रहेगा. अब यहां मैं एक बिंदु और ध्यान दिलाना चाहता हूं उपसभापति महोदय. आज 5 अप्रैल है. आज के दिन का एक महत्व है. आज से 11 साल पहले यही 4 और 5 अप्रैल के समय अन्ना आंदोलन शुरू हुआ था. दिल्ली की राजनीति में उसका बड़ा महत्वपूर्ण महत्व था, क्योंकि हमारे जो 2 प्रमुख विपक्षी दल हैं, एक के लिए जो कांग्रेस पार्टी थी, उनके लिए वो खलनायक थे जिन्हें जेल में भेजा जा सकता था. दूसरी पार्टी जो आज दिल्ली में सत्ता में है, उनके लिए वो गुरु थे, प्रेरणा के स्रोत थे, पितृ पुरुष थे, पर उन्हें बरगलाया जा सकता था, क्योंकि ये उन्होंने कहा कि उन्हें बरगलाया जा सकता था. तो मैं ये कहना चाहता हूं कि दोनों ने ही गुरु माना. आपकी पार्टी में एक थे जो बहुत गुरु गुरु कहते थे, उन्होंने आपको निपटा दिया, और इधर जो गुरु के चेले थे, उन्होंने गुरु को निपटा दिया. एक हिंदी में कहावत है, नाम तो किसी का लिया नहीं,
प्लीज.
उपसभापति महोदय, मैंने किसी का नाम नहीं लिया.
आपका जो समय होगा उतना ही बोल सकते हैं.
कहावत है,
जो समय जिसका है उसी के अनुसार.
एक हिंदी में कहावत है कि गुरु गुड़े रह गए, चेला शक्कर हुई गए. तो वो यहां पर दिखाई पड़ती है। हमने नाम किसी का नहीं लिया है, समझने वाले समझ रहे हैं।
बोल रहे हैं, रिकॉर्ड पे नहीं जा रहा है।
अब यहां पर मैं कहना चाहता हूं कि इस विषय के ऊपर जो इन्होंने बात कही, इस एकीकरण के 3 डायमेंशन है जो इस विषय के ऊपर चर्चा होनी चाहिए। एक संवैधानिक है, एक व्यवहारिक है और एक राजनीतिक है। संवैधानिक दृष्टि से अभी बहुत सी बातें अभिषेक मनु सिंघवी जी ने कही, तो यहां पर मैं कहना चाहता हूं कि माननीय गृह मंत्री जी ने जब लोकसभा में जब इसका उत्तर दिया तो उन्होंने बहुत साफ कहा कि संविधान प्रदत्त व्यवस्था के द्वारा ही इसमें यह परिवर्तन किया जा रहा है। संविधान के जिन अनुच्छेदों का वो उल्लेख करते हैं 246 और 256, वो तो पूर्ण राज्यों पर लागू होते हैं। दिल्ली के संदर्भ में संविधान की धारा 239A बहुत स्पष्ट है और मैं सदन के सुलभ संज्ञान के लिए यह स्पष्ट कर देना चाहता हूं कि एज पर द कॉन्स्टिट्यूशन ऑफ इंडिया द आर्टिकल 239AA स्पेशल प्रोविजंस विद रिस्पेक्ट टू द दिल्ली क्लियर कट कहता है, प्रोवाइडेड फर्दर दैट नथिंग इन दिस सब क्लॉज शैल प्रिवेंट पार्लियामेंट फ्रॉम इनेक्टिंग एट एनी टाइम any law with respect to the same matter, including a law adding to, amending to, varying to, opening, repealing the law so made by the legislative assembly। तो ये संविधान की व्यवस्था के अंतर्गत जो संसद को प्रदत्त अधिकार है उसी के अनुरूप हमारी सरकार ने यह काम किया है। और इतना ही नहीं, जो लोग आज ये कहते हैं कि सरकार को अधिकार नहीं होना चाहिए, वही लोग जनवरी 2016 में जब हाई कोर्ट ने यह पूछा था कि एमसीडी किसके हाथ में है, इसलिए मैं कोर्ट का वो उदाहरण भी कोट करना चाहता हूं। इन जनवरी 2016 when the high court asked who controls the municipal corporation of Delhi, अब समझिए राज्य सरकार क्या जवाब देती है। Delhi government in response said that the MCD did not come under it, but if court directs they are willing to take over the control of the corporation। यानी वो स्वयं तो कह रहे हैं कि हमारे अंडर में नहीं है, मगर हमारी इच्छा है कि यह मेरे अंडर में आ जाए, ये कोर्ट के सामने वो व्यक्त कर रहे हैं। जहां तक उपराज्यपाल के अधिकारों की बात है तो 1991 में राष्ट्रीय राजधानी क्षेत्र का जो एक्ट बना था उसी के अनुसार राज्यपाल को जो प्रदत्त अधिकार हैं जो कांग्रेस शासन के समय में मिले थे, उसी के अनुसार हमारी सरकार ने काम किया है। और वो अधिकार एक बार रिव्यू भी हुए हैं सुप्रीम कोर्ट के द्वारा। रिव्यू होने के बाद उन अधिकारों की जो एक प्रकार से कह सकते हैं कि वेटिंग हुई है और उसके द्वारा दिल्ली के उपराज्यपाल या एलजी को यह अधिकार प्राप्त है। अब सभापति महोदय, प्रश्न यह होता है कि अधिकार तो किसी को प्राप्त होते हैं तो वो करता क्या है। इनको अधिकार प्राप्त थे, गृह मंत्री जी ने अभी संकेत किया कि क्या किया था, मगर हमें अधिकार प्राप्त हुए तो माननीय प्रधानमंत्री जी ने उसी प्रदत्त अधिकार का प्रयोग करते हुए 36 लाख बेसहारा लोगों को, झुग्गी झोपड़ी के लोगों को स्थायी मकान देने का काम किया। और न्यायालय और संवैधानिक प्रावधानों के प्रति कितनी ईमानदारी है यह इस बात से पता चलता है कि उसी न्यायालय ने जब यह कहा कि वित्त आयोग का गठन सरकार करेगी और उसके द्वारा निर्धारित पैसा एमसीडी को मिलेगा, मगर कांग्रेस के दौरे हुकूमत में भी 2012-13 में चौथे वित्त आयोग ने 11,323 करोड़ रुपए एमसीडी को देने की संस्तुति की, परंतु वो उन्होंने नहीं दिया। और आज जो सरकार दिल्ली में बैठी हुई है, इसके स्वयं के वित्त आयोग ने यह संस्तुति की कि 40,500 करोड़ रुपए निकायों को चलाने के लिए देने चाहिए। वो तो छोड़िए, सदन में यह प्रस्ताव किया कि हम इतना नहीं देंगे, हम 17,000 करोड़ रुपए देंगे, परंतु जब देने की बात आई तो 6,129 करोड़ रुपए मात्र दिए। इसीलिए गृह मंत्री जी ने उस शब्द का प्रयोग किया था कि एक सौतेला व्यवहार एमसीडी के द्वारा राज्य सरकार के साथ किया गया। और इतना ही नहीं, जब यह विषय हाई कोर्ट में गया तो हाई कोर्ट ने स्पष्ट निर्देश दिया कि सरकार ने स्वयं अपने वित्त आयोग से जो निर्धारित किया है राशि वह उन्हें देनी चाहिए। उस हाई कोर्ट को मैं कोट कर रहा हूं, उन्होंने लिखा, वी अकॉर्डिंगली अलाउ दिस एप्लीकेशन टू डायरेक्ट द जीएनसीटी to release the current financial year the remaining amount due towards the BTA to the 3 corporations on the basis of their own revised estimate presented in the budget for the year 21-22। यानी हाई कोर्ट ने यह कहा कि आपने अपने बजट में जो प्रावधान किया है कम से कम उसके अनुसार कर दीजिए, परंतु इसके बावजूद भी पैसा नहीं दिया गया, केवल 674 करोड़ रुपए दिया गया। और फिर उसके बाद संवैधानिकता की जो लोग बात करते हैं, तो मैं विनम्रता से कहना चाहूंगा, जिन लोगों ने सीएए को लेकर अपनी विधानसभाओं में प्रस्ताव पारित किए वो संवैधानिक था क्या विदेश संबंधी किसी विषय के ऊपर कोई विधानसभा प्रस्ताव पारित कर सकती है? अभी एमसीडी को लेकर बात कर रहे थे अभिषेक मनु सिंघवी जी, क्या राज्य सरकार के द्वारा प्रस्तावित किसी एक्ट के विरुद्ध एमसीडीज को अधिकार है अपने सदन में पारित करने का? नहीं। तो जिन लोगों ने संविधान का मखौल उड़ाया वो आज संवैधानिकता की बात करते हैं, तो इस बात को लेकर बहुत आश्चर्य होता। हां, मैं एक बात जरूर कहना चाहता हूं, जब किसी लॉ को पास होने की बात होती है तो अभी हाल के दिनों में एक बड़ी मजेदार बात हुई। फार्म लॉ है, किसान संबंधी कानून, सबसे पहले जिस राज्य की विधानसभा ने उसके विरुद्ध प्रस्ताव पारित किया वो थी पंजाब, और वो साफ हो गए। और गलती से ही सही, जिस विधानसभा ने सबसे पहले उसके समर्थन में पारित कर दिया था, आम आदमी पार्टी की दिल्ली की सरकार, वो पंजाब में छा गए। तो अब आप सोचिए कि कई बार आप सोचते हैं कि आपने जो लॉ पारित किया है वो क्या किया है, वो सही या गलत, चुनाव का विषय भी इन्होंने इससे जोड़ने का प्रयास किया। तो मैं कहना चाहता हूं कि जो आम आदमी पार्टी की सरकार है, मुझे ऐसा लगता है चुनावों में उन्होंने एक अप्रतिम काम किया है। शायद चुनाव आयोग ने जो उनको चुनाव चिन्ह दिया है वो बड़ा उपयुक्त दिया है। या तो वो झाड़ू फेर देते हैं या झाड़ू फिरवा लेते हैं, बीच की कोई स्थिति नहीं रहती है। जैसे पंजाब में उन्होंने झाड़ू फेर दिया, मगर गोवा में 39 में 35 सीटों पर जमानत जब्त हो गई, उत्तराखंड में 70 में 68 सीटों पर जमानत जब्त हो गई। दोनों जगह उनके मुख्यमंत्री कैंडिडेट की भी जमानत जब्त हो गई। और उत्तर प्रदेश में तो जितनी सीटों पे लड़े सब पे जमानत ही नहीं जब्त हुई। उपसभापति महोदय, 0.35% वोट मिला, जो नोटा से भी कम था। तो मुझे यह लगता है अरे भाई, चुनाव का विषय बिल के संदर्भ में इनकी पार्टी के द्वारा लाया गया है।
प्लीज संजय जी, माननीय संजय जी, प्लीज।
देखिए, बिल्कुल हम बता रहे हैं, ऐसा लगता है कि इनके चुनाव का विषय इनकी पार्टी की तरफ से लाया गया है कि आप चुनाव को टाल रहे हैं। चुनाव शब्द इनकी पार्टी के द्वारा लाया गया, हमारे द्वारा नहीं लाया गया, इसलिए मैं चुनाव शब्द पे जवाब दे रहा हूं। क्योंकि हकीकत क्या है कि लगता है उत्तर प्रदेश में सपा बसपा पर तो बुलडोजर चला, इन पे तो वैक्यूम क्लीनर चल गया, एकदम पता नहीं कहां पे जो रह गए थे वो भी निकल के बाहर आ गया। अब मैं ये कहना चाहता हूं कि जब हमने एकीकरण का यह प्रयास किया है तो क्यों किया? आज भारत दुनिया की एक उभरती हुई वैश्विक महाशक्ति है। हमारी राष्ट्रीय राजधानी में हम शायद कोई और उदाहरण हमारे विद्वान सदस्य बताएं, क्या दुनिया में कोई दूसरा देश है जिसकी राष्ट्रीय राजधानी में कोई एक मेयर नहीं? हमारे यहां 3 मेयर। कभी अगर आवश्यकता पड़े तो दिल्ली का रिप्रेजेंटेशन अंतर्राष्ट्रीय स्तर पर कैसे होगा? मैं कांग्रेस के लोगों को याद दिलाना चाहता हूं कि 2007 का वर्ष था, यूनाइटेड नेशंस में दिल्ली के मेयर के रूप में प्रतिनिधित्व करने के लिए गए, तब हमारी पार्टी की मेयर थी। प्रणब मुखर्जी जी भी वहां उपस्थित थे, चिदम्बरम जी वहां उपस्थित थे, बान की मून जो कि संयुक्त राष्ट्र संघ के सेक्रेटरी जनरल थे वो भी वहां उपस्थित थे, और दिल्ली ने अपना प्रेजेंटेशन किया। आज आपने ऐसी स्थिति बना दी कि अगर दिल्ली का अंतर्राष्ट्रीय स्तर पर कभी प्रतिनिधित्व करना हो तो वो संभव ही नहीं था। और 2 एमसीडी तो ऐसी बनाई थी कि उनके लिए तो अंतर्राष्ट्रीय मानकों पर जाकर स्थापित होने की संभावना ही बहुत कम थी। इसलिए मैं बधाई देना चाहता हूं गृह मंत्री जी को कि अब तीनों का एकीकरण करके भारत की वैश्विक क्षमता के अनुरूप दिल्ली का भविष्य में अंतर्राष्ट्रीय स्तर पर उपस्थिति का मार्ग प्रशस्त किया है। अब मैं यहां यह कहना चाहता हूं कि जो डिवीजन हुआ है उसमें संसाधनों का कैसा असंतुलित विभाजन हुआ, जिसका कि संकेत गृह मंत्री जी ने अभी दिया, इसका मैं सिर्फ 2 उदाहरण देना चाहता हूं कि ईस्ट दिल्ली म्युनिसिपल कॉर्पोरेशन के 80% से अधिक क्षेत्र या तो अनऑथोराइज्ड या अनप्लान्ड एरिया में है, जहां से रेवेन्यू का बहुत ही कम सोर्स आता है। तो एक ऐसा क्षेत्र बन गया जिसके पास बहुत कम राजस्व आएगा, तो उसके लिए सस्टेन करना ही मुश्किल है। दूसरी तरफ नॉर्थ एमसीडी में लगभग सभी बड़े प्रमुख जो एमसीडी के हॉस्पिटल थे, 5 हॉस्पिटल्स आ गए, तो उनको कैपिटल रेवेन्यू बहुत उसके ऊपर खर्च करना पड़ेगा, जबकि उनके पास उसके उपयुक्त आय का स्रोत नहीं है। क्योंकि जब एक दिल्ली थी तो यह विचार करके नहीं बनाया गया था कि ये हॉस्पिटल्स भी अलग अलग क्षेत्र में होने चाहिए और यह भी अलग अलग क्षेत्र में होने चाहिए। इसलिए मैं कह रहा हूं, और देखिए टैक्स पेयर्स की ढंग से देखें तो ईस्ट दिल्ली में टैक्स पेयर्स की संख्या है 2,88,000, नॉर्थ में है 3,35,000 और साउथ में है 4,75,000। अब ये तो संख्या है, पर गुणवत्ता के आधार पे देखेंगे, संख्या के आधार पे देखेंगे, राशि के आधार पे देखेंगे तो उसमें साउथ दिल्ली की स्थिति बहुत बेहतर नजर आती है। इसलिए संसाधनों का एक बहुत असंतुलित डिस्ट्रीब्यूशन हुआ, जिसकी वजह से यह समस्या और बढ़ती चली गई। और उसमें फिर जब राज्य सरकार के द्वारा न्याय नहीं किया गया, तो यह भी आप देखिए, दिल्ली का एक साल का बजट 75,800 करोड़, एमसीडी के लिए संस्तुति 40,500 करोड़ और आवंटन 6,129 करोड़। बस यह संख्या अपने आप में पर्याप्त है बताने के लिए कि एमसीडी के लिए किस प्रकार का न्याय किया गया और क्यों एमसीडी के एकीकरण की आज आवश्यकता थी। मैं इसलिए तुलना करना चाहता हूं, यदि दिल्ली की एमसीडी की तुलना हो सकती है तो बीएमसी से हो सकती है, बृहन मुंबई म्युनिसिपल कॉर्पोरेशन, जिसका कि बजट 46,000 करोड़ रुपए का है। इसीलिए उसके अनुपात में 40,500 करोड़ रुपए का बजट युक्तिसंगत लगता है। परंतु 6,000 जब दिया जाएगा तो आप सोचिए कि कितनी मुश्किल होती है। परंतु उसके बाद भी मैं बधाई देना चाहता हूं कि एमसीडी ने इस विपरीत परिस्थितियों में भी 2020 में जहां 7.2 लाख बच्चे एनरोल्ड थे, तो 22 में 8.70 लाख हुए और 47 नए विद्यालय भी खुले। दूसरी तरफ जो दिल्ली की राज्य सरकार है, स्वयं उसने जो दिल्ली विश्वविद्यालय के कॉलेजेस उनके साथ संबंध है, उसमें करीब 12 कॉलेज हैं, उसके लिए उन्होंने लिख के भेजा कि हमारे पास संसाधन आर्थिक कम पड़ रहे हैं, हमारे लिए यहां पर सैलरी देना संभव नहीं है, जो दिल्ली विश्वविद्यालय के कॉलेज थे। और स्वयं इतना कम इन्होंने संसाधन दिए, इसके बावजूद एमसीडी ने बहुत अच्छे ढंग से उन विद्यालयों का संचालन किया, इसके लिए वो बधाई के पात्र हैं। फिर चाहे दिल्ली के सौंदर्यीकरण का सारा भार एमसीडी के ऊपर हो, 15,000 पार्क हो, 3,700 पार्कों में झूले, 5,82,000 एलईडी लाइट्स लगाई गई, सारा सौंदर्यीकरण हुआ। कोविड के दौरान छतरपुर में एक बड़ा हॉस्पिटल भी बना, जिसका उद्घाटन गृह मंत्री जी ने किया था। छोटी छोटी बातों का भी ध्यान रखा गया, जैसे मार्केट में महिलाओं के लिए पिंक टॉयलेट इत्यादि बनाने का भी काम उस समय सरकार के द्वारा किया गया। भले ही दूसरी तरफ किस प्रकार की व्यवस्था थी अलग बात है। दिल्ली जल बोर्ड जो पहले 10 साल पहले प्रॉफिट में था, आज हजारों करोड़ रुपए के, लगभग 57,000 करोड़ रुपए के घाटे में है, वो अपने आप में एक अलग विषय था। तीसरी बात यह थी कि एक ही प्रकार की चीज के लिए एडमिनिस्ट्रेटिव पैराफर्नेलिया बहुत ज्यादा होने की स्थिति उत्पन्न हो गई। 22 विभाग थे, 66 हो गए, 3 मेयर हो गए, 3 कमिश्नर हो गए, 3 विभाग, 3 गाड़ियां और अनेक प्रकार का जो सरकारी पैराफर्नेलिया होता है वो बढ़ता चला गया, जिसके कारण दिल्ली की जनता पर 150 करोड़ रुपए का अतिरिक्त अधिभार बन रहा था, जिसको सरकार ने समाप्त करने का काम किया। एकीकरण होने से काम भी बेहतर होगा। और काम का उदाहरण देते हैं, अगर डीसीपी के 12 जोन हैं और वो यथावत काम कर रहे थे, तो यदि पुलिस के जोन उसी हिसाब से काम कर रहे थे तो प्रशासनिक जोन भी उसी ढंग से काम कर सकते थे, तो दिल्ली की जनता से ये 150 करोड़ रुपए प्रति वर्ष का अधिभार की आवश्यकता नहीं रहेगी। यहां पर मैं यह भी कोट करना चाहूंगा कि दिल्ली सरकार ने 2006 में म्युनिसिपल कॉर्पोरेशन के रिफॉर्म के लिए कमेटी बनाई थी, जिसमें उन्होंने अपने एक फॉर्मर ब्यूरोक्रेट को उसका अध्यक्ष बनाया था। दिसंबर 2020 में उन्होंने लिखा that it was the biggest mistake of then government to break the municipal corporation, which has led to the situation today. He said that his committee has recommended to the then union government, yani 2006 mein, and the Delhi government, that MCD of the Delhi was not easily divisible and that its division could bring the multiple problems, including the geographical challenges and the inequitable distribution of the resources. तो इसका अर्थ यह हुआ कि आपकी सरकारों ने भी जो समितियां बनाई थी, उनमें भी जो व्यावसायिक आपको सजेशन मिला था, वो पूरी तरीके से आपने उसको नहीं माना। इसीलिए यह विभेदपूर्ण स्थिति उत्पन्न हुई, जिसकी तरफ इशारा किया गया कि एक नहीं अनेकों स्ट्राइक हुई। 2021 में म्युनिसिपल स्टाफ ने जो स्ट्राइक की, उसमें 10 डिफरेंट ओकेजन पे लगभग 7 मिलियन वर्क आवर्स का लॉस हुआ और जनवरी 6 से 21 के बीच में 52,000 इंप्लॉइज इन्वॉल्व हुए और 52,000 इंप्लॉइज का इन्वॉल्व होना अभी तक की सबसे बड़ी स्ट्राइक्स में से एक शुमार किया जाता है। दिसंबर 2020 में मेयर्स ने हंगर स्ट्राइक की मुख्यमंत्री जी के ऑफिस के बाहर बैठकर। अक्टूबर 2019 में 260 टीचरों ने जाकर स्कूल के सामने, म्युनिसिपल कॉर्पोरेशन के सामने प्रोटेस्ट किया। 2018 में अगर आप देखें तो सैनिटेशन वर्कर्स को प्रोटेस्ट करना पड़ा। यह कहीं ना कहीं दर्शा रहा था कि किस प्रकार का भेदभावपूर्ण रवैया था और जो एमसीडी का ड्यू था वो नहीं मिल पा रहा था। और स्ट्राइक लगातार हुई जनवरी 2017 में, जनवरी 2016 में, जनवरी 2015 में, परंतु किसी के कान पे जू नहीं रहेंगी। क्यों नहीं रहेंगी? क्योंकि जो पार्टियां थी, वो तो जो पार्टी दिल्ली में थी वो तो नई राजनीति की प्रतीक थी। उनका कहना था नई राजनीति है, तो वो नई राजनीति के प्रणेता थे, तो नई राजनीति पे वो कुछ सुनने को तैयार नहीं थे। और उनकी नई राजनीति की जो पूरी कथा है 11 वर्ष की, हम ये नहीं कहना चाहते, एक ही पंक्ति में अगर कह दूं तो पहले कहते थे राजनीति में नहीं आएंगे, आ गए। फिर कहते थे सारी संसद और विधानसभा के लिए बड़ा आपत्तिजनक शब्द प्रयोग करते थे, असंसदीय होने के कारण मैं प्रयोग नहीं कर रहा हूं, वहां भी आ गए, उसके सिरमौर भी बन गए। शीला दीक्षित जी के लिए अभी हमारे अभिषेक मनु सिंघवी जी तो बोल रहे थे, पर वो भूल गए कि सारे ऑटो के बाहर 2013 में बेईमान जैसा शब्द लिखा हुआ। कहते थे हमारे पास तो सैकड़ों करोड़ की सैकड़ों पन्नों की बुक है, और जब हम लोगों ने कहा कार्रवाई करो तो कहते सबूत ला के दीजिए। ये एक नई राजनीति थी। फिर कहा ना भाजपा समर्थन लेंगे ना कांग्रेस से लेंगे, फिर लिखित में समर्थन मांगा। फिर कहते थे जन लोकपाल लाएंगे, जन लोकपाल तो छोड़िए, अपनी पार्टी में एक लोकपाल थे उनके एडमिरल साहब, उनको भी समाप्त कर दिया। फिर कहते थे सीएम आवास नहीं लेंगे, वो भी लिया, सुरक्षा नहीं लेंगे, वो भी लिया। अब वो वैगन आर कार भी नजर नहीं आती है, और चार्टर्ड प्लेन की भी आवश्यकता पड़ी, कोई बात नहीं। कहते थे नो वीआईपी कल्चर। याद करिए 2015 में 26 जनवरी का दिन, जिस दिन बराक ओबामा आए थे, उस दिन बाकायदा उनकी पार्टी की तरफ से यह कहा गया कि पूर्व मुख्यमंत्री के रूप में जो वीआईपी सीट मिलनी चाहिए थी वो नहीं मिली। इसका अर्थ यह हो गया। फिर इतना ही नहीं, बिहार में जाकर राजद और अन्य दलों के साथ वो खड़े हुए जाके, प्लीज प्लीज, हाँ जी बिल्कुल हो रही है मान्यवर, अरे इतना नहीं, सुनिए तो प्लीज प्लीज, बिल्कुल आप सुनाइएगा जनाब सुधांशु जी। अरे हमारे माननीय सदस्य प्लीज, नई राजनीति के प्रणेता हमारे माननीय सदस्य लोग भी पार्टी में जाकर उत्तर प्रदेश में सपा से भी गठबंधन करने का प्रयास किया। उनकी जो भी आपत्ति है मान्यवर
ऑनरेबल मेंबर एड्रेस द चेयर को एड्रेस करें। माननीय सुधांशु जी एड्रेस को चेयर को एड्रेस करें।
माननीय सभापति महोदय, ये मैं सिर्फ ये बताना चाहता हूं कि जो लोग कहते थे कि हम नई राजनीति लाएंगे, वो आकर कैसे 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 रूप बदलते हुए कहां तक पहुंच गए। तो ये अन्यथा न ले, तो इनके लिए कहना चाहता हूं एक बिंदु कि खुदा जब हुस्न देता है नजाकत आ ही जाती है, कदम गिन गिन के रखो पर कमर बल खाई जाती है। तो ये बल खाते चले गए, और ऐसा बल खाए कि इन्होंने एक नई राजनीति ये जरूर शुरू की कि पहले कहा एक दूसरे पे कि हम मानहानि का केस आरोप लगा देते थे, फिर माफी मांगते थे। हमारे नेता स्वर्गीय अरुण जेटली जी से भी माफी मांग चुके, नितिन गडकरी जी से भी माफी मांग चुके, औरों से भी किया। तो ये एक नई राजनीति जरूर है। ये मैं मानता हूं कि इन्होंने इस मामले में एक नई राजनीति का सूत्रपात करने में जरूर सफलता हासिल की। मगर मैं यह भी कहना चाहता हूं, जब बिल के विषय में ही बात हो रही थी, तो किस प्रकार का सरकार का संवेदनशील रवैया है, मैं ईमानदारी से पूछता हूं, यह बताइए। इनके मुख्यमंत्री महोदय शायद समकालीन भारतीय राजनीति के सबसे पढ़े लिखे आईआईटी ग्रेजुएट हैं, पर वो क्या कहते वैक्सीन का फार्मूला सबको बांट दो। अरे भाई, कोई चूरन है जो सबको बांट देना चाहिए? ऐसी अव्यवहारिक बात मैं रिकॉर्ड पे कह रहा हूं, चाहे कांग्रेस पार्टी के नेता और नेत्री और चाहे आम आदमी पार्टी के नेता, इन्होंने अप्रैल 2021 में कहा बच्चों का वैक्सीन बाहर भेज दिया गया। इतनी छलपूर्ण राजनीति। उस समय तो पूरी दुनिया में बच्चों का वैक्सीन नहीं बना था, और सब ऑन रिकॉर्ड कह रहे थे कि बच्चों का वैक्सीन बाहर भेज दिया गया। ये इस बात का प्रमाण है। और फिर इस ढंग की अव्यवहारिक बात कहते हैं, प्लीज इस ढंग की अव्यवहारिक बात,
माननीय सुधांशु जी ऑन द बिल,
हाँ इस ढंग की अव्यवहारिक बात कहते सभापति महोदय, प्लीज कोई सामान्य व्यक्ति कहे तो बात समझ में आती है।
संजय जी
यूट्यूब पे डाल दो,
प्लीज संजय जी,
अब वो
प्लीज संजय जी, सुधांशु जी,
इस ढंग की जो फिल्मों को डालने की यूट्यूब पे बात कहते हैं, एक बहुत ही हल्की बात लगती है। अब सुनिए, अरे भाई आगे बात तो सुनिए
प्लीज। सुधांशु जी एड्रेस द चेयर।
अब मैं सभापति महोदय बताना चाहता हूं कि इन लोगों ने जिस प्रकार की अव्यवस्था की, मैंने कोविड के दौर का क्यों जिक्र किया। हाई कोर्ट में लोग गए और हाई कोर्ट ने टिप्पणी की कि कोविड के दौरान जिस प्रकार की अव्यवस्था थी, मई 2021 का मैं हाई कोर्ट का कोर्ट बता रहा हूं, जब उसने कहा कि व्हाट इज द यूज ऑफ मोहल्ला क्लिनिक, इट इज द वेस्ट ऑफ रिसोर्सेज इफ यू मेड दिस infrastructure, what's the worth if it cannot be used for the purpose of dealing during the pandemic, जिसको ये सबसे बड़ा अपना महत्व मानते थे। फिर हाई कोर्ट ने दूसरी भी बात कही कि what is the point of having more beds when there are no sufficient doctors। ये दोनों टिप्पणियां हाई कोर्ट की इस बात के लिए प्रमाण है कि एक तरफ एमसीडी के डॉक्टर्स, एमसीडी के नर्स, एमसीडी का स्टाफ, एमसीडी के सफाई कर्मचारी कम वेतन मिलने की समस्याओं के बावजूद निरंतर उस दौर में काम कर रहे थे, और दूसरी तरफ जो ये कर रहे थे उसमें इनकी जो वस्तुस्थिति थी साफ नजर आ रही थी। अब मैं कहना चाहता हूं, हमारे विरोधियों को चाहे लगेगा कि वो ये कह रहे हैं विषय के ऊपर,
1 सेकंड, विच रूल,
विषय के ऊपर डाइवर्ट होने की बात कहते हैं।
238 which point? 238 which one? A, B, C, D, E, which one?
Sir, a member while speaking shall not refer to any matter of fact on which a judicial decision is pending, make a personal charge against a member, use offensive expression about the conduct or proceeding of the House or any state legislature, reflect or any determination of the Council except on a motion for rescinding it, reflect upon the conduct of persons in high authority unless the discussion is based on a substantiated
Understood.
motion
Mani Shantanu ji.
drawn in paper terms. So this point need to be expunged, sir. This
We'll
point
examine.
need to be expunged.
अब मैं आगे बताना चाहता हूं, देखिए टिप्पणी सुनना भी कितना कठिन प्रतीत होता है सभापति महोदय, यह इस बात को दर्शाता है। कोई बात नहीं, देखिए ये किस बात को दर्शाता है सभापति महोदय।
बिल पे आते।
जी बिल्कुल, नहीं अब मैं इस विषय पे भी आ रहा हूं। सारे बिंदु मैंने बिंदुवार गिनाए हैं, ये डर को दर्शाता है।
प्लीज
सभापति महोदय,
आपका पॉइंट ऑफ ऑर्डर मैंने लिया। नाउ लेट्स लिसन प्लीज, आई हैव अलाउड योर पॉइंट ऑफ ऑर्डर प्लीज।
सभापति महोदय, ये वो लोग कह रहे हैं जो कहते थे कि हम डर गए, और अब यदि कोर्ट की टिप्पणियों का विषय आए तो कौन डर रहा है यह साफ नजर आता है। मैं सभापति महोदय कहना चाहता हूं कि जब इस विषय के ऊपर दिल्ली के मुख्यमंत्री ने स्वयं यह बात बोली है, एमसीडी के संदर्भ में, एमसीडी के संदर्भ में बात करते हुए उन्होंने कहा है कि डर गए, इसलिए मैं इस विषय के संदर्भ में ही बोल रहा हूं, क्योंकि यह डर का संदर्भ उनके द्वारा लाया गया है। मान्यवर, मैं बताना चाहता हूं, हम डरेंगे जो 1953 में श्यामा प्रसाद मुखर्जी जी जब वहां श्रीनगर में गए, प्राण दे दिए, उस समय नहीं डरे। सन 66 में गोरक्षा आंदोलन में गोलियां चलाई इंदिरा जी की सरकार में, तब नहीं डरे। आपातकाल के भयंकर दुर्धर्ष दौर में हम नहीं डरे। बोफोर्स के समय में 400 की मेजॉरिटी लेके जब राजीव गांधी की सरकार थी, तब नहीं डरे। 92 में हमारी 3-3 सरकारें अकारण बर्खास्त कर दी गई, प्रतिबंध लगा दिए गए, तब हम नहीं डरे। जिस जमाने में झूठे केस लगाए गए हिंदू आतंकवाद के, तब नहीं डरे। श्री नरेंद्र मोदी जी के ऊपर बेवजह के केसेस लगाकर उनके ऊपर फंदे कसने का प्रयास किया गया, गृह मंत्री जी के ऊपर इस प्रकार के आरोप लगाए गए, हम तब नहीं डरे। तो ये कह रहे हैं कि इनसे डरने की बात है। हम तो उस परंपरा के प्रतीक हैं जिसे मैं कहना चाहूंगा हम अकेले थे और आगे बढ़ते रहे, नहीं डरे। जिसे मैं कहना चाहूंगा कि अन्य होंगे चरण हारे और हैं जो लौटते दे शूल को संकल्प सारे, चिरवृत्ति निर्माण उन्मद यह अमरता नापते पद, बांध देंगे अंक संस्कृति से तिमिर में स्वर्ण बेला, पंत होने दो अपरिचित प्राण रहने दो अकेला। मगर मैं यह बताना चाहता हूं, हमें डर नहीं है, हमें पीड़ा है। पीड़ा इस बात की है कि इस दिल्ली के अंदर एमसीडी के कर्मचारियों को उनका रिक्विजिट ड्यू नहीं मिले, उस बात की पीड़ा है। हमें पीड़ा इस बात की है कि यहां पर 20,000 कश्मीरी हिंदू रहते हैं और उनकी पीड़ा को लेकर एक खिलखिलाहट जब वहां सुनाई पड़ती है तो वो हमारे दिल में पीड़ा उत्पन्न करती है। हमारे दिल में यह पीड़ा यह होती है कि जो पार्टी सत्ता में है, एमसीडी में जिसके काउंसलर अनेक प्रकार के रिश्वत के आरोपों से भी हैं, अनेक प्रकार के आरोप लगे हैं। एमसीडी के ही इनके काउंसलर थे जिसके ऊपर दंगे में इतना बड़ा आरोप लगा था, जिनके की छत के ऊपर हथियारों का जखीरा निकला था, उसके लिए दिल में बड़ी मोहब्बत है। इनके नेता ने बोला था शाहीन बाग हमारे दिल में है, उनके लिए रहमत है। मौलवियों का भत्ता 10,000 से 18,000 होना चाहिए, उसके लिए दिल में रहमत है। इन्होंने कहा सहायकों का 10,000 होना चाहिए, उसके लिए रहमत है। मगर एमसीडी के लोगों को सैलरी देने के लिए दिल में हिकारत है।
You're a senior member. सुधांशु जी कंक्लूड करें, आपका समय समाप्त होने जा रहा है।
सभापति महोदय, मैं बिल्कुल साफ कह रहा हूं, उन सब के लिए दिल में रहमत है और एमसीडी के सफाई कर्मचारी, डॉक्टर, नर्स, शिक्षक, उनकी तनख्वाह देने के लिए आपके दिल में रहमत नहीं है, उनके लिए वो आप पैसा नहीं दे पा रहे हैं। अब मैं आपको अंत में मैं ये कहना चाहता हूं, हकीकत में जानते हैं भय क्या है। ठीक है, किसी को थोड़ा विषयांतर लग सकता है, परंतु ये दिल्ली अब बदल रही है और दिल्ली बदल रही है तो बदलने वालों को शायद वो बदलना स्वीकार नहीं हो रहा है। मैं यहां पर यदि पूछूं, इस दिल्ली में अंतिम भारतीय राजा पृथ्वीराज चौहान हुए थे। शायद हम में से भी बहुत कम लोगों को पूछा जाए पृथ्वीराज चौहान जी के पिता का नाम क्या था, शायद उंगलियों पर गिनने लायक लोगों को पता होगा। वैसे जो बिल प्रोड्यूस किया है तो माननीय गृह मंत्री जी को तो इसकी अच्छी जानकारी मुझे व्यक्तिगत चर्चा से भी पता है। मगर इसी दिल्ली में बैठकर हम में से किसी से पूछा जाए, चाहे वो दक्षिण भारत का क्यों ना हो, कि औरंगजेब के पिता का क्या नाम था, तो पूरी की पूरी वंशावली पता होती। दिल्ली की यह सोच अब बदल रही है। मेहरौली का जहां पर स्तंभ हमारा खड़ा हुआ है, बगल में कुतुब मीनार है, हमारी मेट्रोलॉजिकल एक्सीलेंस का प्रतीक दिल्ली में खड़ा है, उसको प्रतीक न मानकर किसी ऐसी चीज का प्रतीक जिसके बारे में जहां से कहा जाता आए थे पता नहीं वहां तो कोई खंभा भी बना था कि नहीं कभी ये पता नहीं है, परंतु उसको प्रतीक मानते हैं। यह भय है कि अब दिल्ली अपने वास्तविक स्वरूप में उभर कर सामने ना आने पाए। दिल्ली भारत का केंद्र है और भारत की चेतना का वह स्वरूप उभर कर ना सामने आने पाए, वह भय है। इस भय के लिए मैं अंत में सिर्फ अटल जी की उस पंक्ति के साथ समाप्त करता हूं जिसमें दिल्ली का उल्लेख है। अटल जी की बड़ी प्रसिद्ध कविता थी, हिंदू तनमन हिंदू जीवन रग रग हिंदू मेरा परिचय। मैं बता रहा हूं, आपका भय उसमें सामने आ जाएगा। उस पंक्ति उनकी मैं 4 पंक्तियां कहकर अपना विषय समाप्त करता हूं। मैं तेज पुंज तमलीन जगत में फैलाया मैंने प्रकाश, जगती का करके सर्वनाश कब चाहा कर लूं निज विकास। शरणागत की रक्षा की है मैंने अपना जीवन देकर। आपने शरणागतों के खिलाफ प्रस्ताव पारित किया था सीए में। शरणागत की रक्षा की है मैंने अपना जीवन देकर, विश्वास नहीं यदि आता तो यह साक्षी है इतिहास अमर। यदि आज देहली के खंडहर सदियों की निद्रा से जगकर गुंजार उठे ऊंचे स्वर में, हिंदू की जय तो क्या विस्मय, हिंदू तनमन हिंदू जीवन रग रग हिंदू मेरा परिचय। बस ये इनका असली भय है, परंतु वह भय इनका रहने दीजिए, हम विकास के पथ पर आगे बढ़ते रहें।
थैंक यू श्री जवाहर सरकार जी। श्री जवाहर सरकार जी।
Thank you, sir. We have heard a lot of talk about rising above politics, but for the last half an hour, all I heard was a level of politics that would rather suit the Delhi Legislative Assembly more. I respect it more than this House. Be that as it may, sir, we have risen because we are duty-bound to stand up for federalism, for the spirit of federalism that holds this country together in spite of whatever some temporary occupants of power may think they have. This country has essentially survived on the spirit of heterogeneity. Do not go in for homogeneity, do not go in for trampling, do not go in for one-way decisions. The very decision that you have taken or about to take or about asking us to endorse is one that speaks of control. My former speaker, Mr. Singhvi, has already mentioned about these things. In 2011, after several discussions, 3 bodies were trifurcated out of the Municipal Corporation of Delhi. Okay? You know that, I know that. Now, you say the Honorable Home Minister, who has introduced the topic of not speaking on politics only, mentions that they have a revenue deficit. Fair enough. So if one has a revenue deficit of 2, the other has a revenue deficit of 3, the third has a revenue deficit of 4, if you add them together, you get -2, -3, -4, -9.